Welcome to the Muscle Expert Podcast with Ben Pakulski, one of the world's top professional bodybuilders, an expert on human performance and mindset mastery. Ben dives deep to deliver the strategies of the top experts to upgrade your body, mind, muscle, strength, performance, biochemistry, and how to become the upgraded modern man.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Muscle Expert Podcast. I feel like I live a pretty blessed life. I get to travel the world and meet the world's greatest experts on health optimization, on muscle building, on performance. And this gentleman has added a tremendous amount of value to my life, and he's going to do the same for you today during this podcast. So Dr. Anthony J has been on the podcast before talking about estrogen, and today he was so gracious as to fly into Tampa, record in the studio here, and really break down my personal DNA, which is, you guys get an amazing insight into my life in this podcast, but we're going to talk about so much more and the implications of epigenetics, the implications of how you can start to understand your DNA. There's some really complex language used here, stuff that I don't even understand, and even though he's standing in front of me, pointing it out to me, it's really very, very deep stuff if you're not into the world of DNA and epigenetics. But you don't need to know the types of SNP or the name of the SNP or the gene for which this codes. But listen to the information and realize these are all things that you can influence. And there's power in that, right? So finding out your DNA and then finding someone to interpret it for you is a very valuable thing. And I think it's a really empowering thing because a lot of people give away their power saying, oh, I don't have the genetics, or, oh, I can't do it because BS, right? Obviously. So by understanding how your body works and understand that you can change these things is a really powerful place to come from. So Dr. Anthony J and I dive into infrared light and all the amazing personal research he's doing on this stuff at the Mayo Clinic, as well as all of my DNA and what you guys need to know about DNA and about epigenetic expression. And we also get into his passion and talking about plastics and how that's influencing estrogen. We also talk about testosterone. We also talk about epigenetics in general, which is a vastly misunderstood or underunderstood aspect of health optimization. So you guys are going to love this podcast as much as I did. It's a long one, so be patient, but there's so many golden nuggets as we discuss every one of my influential genes. Enjoy the show with Dr. Anthony J. I absolutely love the idea of convenience and health, right? So for many years, I was the guy juicing. I was the guy jamming things into my juicer, into my blender, trying to get as many different micronutrients and phytonutrients as I could. And it takes time, and it's ridiculously expensive. I mean, I used to try to put 5 to 7 fruits and vegetables, always usually vegetables, into a smoothie with some lemon and tons of ice and some water, and it ended up costing me $20 to $30 per smoothie. You go to Whole Foods, it's going to cost you $20 just to get a juice. It's extremely expensive. So I'm extremely grateful that Organifi has been so gracious to offer you and me a 20% discount off their greens drink, which is an incredible tasting, nutrient-dense array of superfoods. And it's honestly awesome. I use it daily. My kids even drink it. It's got a little minty flavor that just tastes awesome. They've also got the Reds, which I'm an advocate of using pre-workout. I'm also an advocate of using a little bit after you work out, just to get those high polyphenols in there. Again, not immediately after the workout because we want to have that oxidative stress, but maybe an hour afterwards with your meal. Great way to get some extra antioxidants and polyphenols into your brain, ladies and gents. And if you haven't tried the Organifi Gold, do it because you're going to thank me later. It's just an amazing tasting, calming formula that myself and sometimes my kids will enjoy before bed. And I hope you guys take this opportunity to jump on it and take care of Organifi because they're taking care of us. Truthfully great stuff that I use every day. My entire team here at the gym uses it, and we're loving it rather than having to take coffee in the morning, which I did for so many years, and sometimes I still do. It's really nice to have that refreshing, energizing green beverage in the morning. Add some ice, throw it in the blender. It tastes amazing. You could just shake it. Tastes great too. But I like to have it nice and cold. And while I'm sitting there doing my reading first thing in the morning, it's a great addition to my morning routine and gives me the energy I need for the day. And I know I'm covered, right? If I don't end up eating all my vegetables for the day, I have my micronutrients covered. That's enough talking for me. Enjoy the rest of the show. Are you isolating spectrums or are you doing full spectrum infrared?
I'm isolating spectrum. Yeah, the Juve guys sent me their
so using the Juve.
The specific. Yeah, okay. Yeah. It's one of the better ones. It's probably the best one out there.
Yeah. Now what are they using? 640 or something, or 840? What do you know? What not that it matters, but I think the listener
it's in
maybe
the 800s.
840 maybe. The listeners are interested because there's so many companies out there going, it's infrared bulb with spectrum, right?
Yeah, and I did a bunch of YouTube videos on it. Like if people search my name in YouTube and because I looked at it, but I don't remember it off the top of my head with spectra. But what's really cool is it gets through your cranium. It goes through your skull. So they've done cadaver studies, and it can get 3 inches past your skull, and it decreases amyloid plaque. So this is hilarious, right? They put aluminum foil over mice heads, over the heads of mice. They wrapped them in aluminum, and they had, of course, groups with and without aluminum foil on their heads. And they had this amyloid plaque model of mice, so Alzheimer's model.
Yep.
And the ones that were wrapped in aluminum foil had a lot more amyloid. Because it gets through your skull, it actually decreases, plaque in your brain.
Man, it's funny that.
But you got to be like right up against it. That's what people don't realize.
You're not getting the same benefit from just being in the sun.
Well, you might. I don't know, but yeah, I think with the infrared lights at least,
right? You
got to be right there, especially for the brain benefits.
Okay.
There's 2 benefits. There's a localized benefit, having it right here.
So literally, like as close as you can get it.
Yeah. And then there was a systemic benefit. So even the mice that were wrapped in aluminum foil had less. So there was a grade.
Infrared hat.
Yeah, well, so there was 3 groups, I should have said, right? Because there was a group that wasn't even exposed to infrared.
Right.
They had the most plaque. And then the group with aluminum foil also had a lot of plaque, but not as much as the ones.
Really? So why would that be?
Just having their bodies exposed to infrared changes their bloodstream. So it's a systemic benefit. And then, of course, the ones without the aluminum foil covering their heads had like a massive
guys, benefit. If you're listening, you need to we need to do an infrared hat.
Yeah. Yeah. Or just get the Juve and just put it right up on the...
So are we live?
Because, it's hard with a piece of paper here we're looking at, but increases TRPV. That's a cationic channel.
What does that mean?
It's basically a calcium channel. So you get calcium influx into cells.
So now, how is that? Is that a similar? So when you're being exposed to EMF, it's influx out of the cells. So EMF, we talk about the voltage gated calcium channels. That's releasing calcium out, right?
I'm not sure. Probably. I mean, the thing is, it can go either way, right? Because you're opening these channels, you can get calcium going in either direction depending on the gradient.
So what is that? How's that going to influence us?
I mean, calcium, all kinds of different ways, right? I mean, the most tangible way is that you feel heat and then you feel kind of a sensation. But I mean, it's a what's the word? It's a good stress, right? It's the hormetic.
Hormetic stress.
So in other words, it's a positive stressor until you hit a certain point, and then it becomes a negative stressor.
That's interesting too. Increases collagen production.
Yeah, which
at just very low amounts of time.
Yeah, right away. For sure.
With short distance.
And the reason I was interested in that is because, you got to get close, but because it's TGF beta related, and that's normally seen as a bad thing, right? Just like NF kappa beta up here. Because TGF beta is known as a bad inflammatory molecule, but all of this stuff, right, increases BDNF. All of these things are similar to exercise.
So now, how are you seeing this? Give me a breakdown of
neuronal BDNF. Yeah. So it attenuates the decrease of neuronal BDNF.
How are you measuring that?
So what people would do for that, they'd probably use an animal, and they would hit them with infrared, and then have a group that didn't have infrared, and then they would probably do multiple different validation techniques. They would slice the brain and use antibodies that stick only to BDNF and fluorescently tagged antibodies and light it up so you can see it. So you'd have like little micrometer slices of brain,
right?
And you'd look at it. You'd see it light up if it has BDNF. But then there's other ways to do that where you would just use the lysate. You would use the whole protein brain, grind it up, and then use antibodies to probe it. That way you can use mass spectroscopy. There's a bunch of ways. And as a scientist, what we normally try to do is do 3 different validation techniques. You don't want to just use one technique, or you're probably just not being honest with yourself.
Are the Juve guys familiar with all these benefits? Because I've never heard them talk about it. They're recently on Dave Asprey, and I'm like, gosh,
most scientists.
If they knew all this stuff, this is incredible, man.
Yeah, well, I think so too. So when I started looking at infrared, I didn't think there was much out there. If you look up infrared sauna, infrared benefits, whatever on PubMed, you don't find anything.
Right.
You look up low-level laser light therapy, and there's a ton of research, and that's the trick is you got to know that term. And it took me a while.
It's the same mechanism.
Thing. Yeah, the same nanometer wavelengths. And then you find all of these things. And of course, this is me putting it all together, trying to wrap my head around the benefits for stem cells, because apparently stem cells are the most responsive cells to infrared in terms of changes, positive or negative changes. And like I said, it's like exercise, right? The negative changes come because you're overdoing it. You're sitting in the infrared for 20 minutes or something. So it's different for different people.
You think that's just a bad...
Well, it depends how close you are, right? So it's different for different people for sure. And then it's different depending on how close you are to the light. So in my opinion, get right up next to it, hit 5 or 10, and switch body parts, or if you have a small one, or just turn it off,
Very cool, man. So I was always assuming I needed to aim for 20 to 30 minutes, but...
Well, maybe you do if you're sitting a ways and you're a big dude, and it takes a while to get through those muscles.
I'll tell you, I definitively know that I feel a difference. I do too. At first, I was like, I don't know, let's try it. I
get paresthesia. Really? Have you ever had, you've had beta-alanine?
Yeah.
You know that paresthesia feeling? I get that because of the nitric oxide release. Presumably, I'm just guessing that's what it is, but my wife doesn't get that at all. She can sit there 10 minutes, get nothing. Within about 10 minutes for me, I start getting the tingling paresthesia, and it weirds me out. Yeah. Because I know I'm getting a response. But this is my actual data from my stem cells. So these are fat derived from humans. So
put this up. We'll have Trey put this up in the YouTube video and have him just show everyone what we're looking at.
So I'm getting a response with VEGF. But the gene names you don't need to know necessarily, but there's different isoforms of the genes and all this complicated. HIF-1 alpha stands for hypoxia-induced factor. It's associated with cancer if you go crazy with it, but it's also associated with exercise, right?
Right. So glucose uptake and metabolism.
Exercise, And then
that's VEGF. Inclusive.
Well, no, this is HIF-1. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
HIF-1 induces VEGF too, so that's why I put them on the same page, because they're related, they're connected.
And again, this is all just from the infrared.
Yeah, 100%. So this is control
inducing angiogenesis, vasodilation, endothelial growth. Wow.
Yeah, isn't this cool? So
you're doing it every day? You try to do it every day?
Infrared?
Yeah.
I'm not that consistent, but I probably would
if you had an ideal
perfect world. Yeah.
Yeah. So 5. Does it matter morning, night? Do you think it matters?
No. And I think it complements exercise really well because, from my studies of it imitates exercise.
Really?
Almost identical. That's why I think it's so beneficial.
So
you can overtrain with infrared.
Right.
Just like you can overtrain exercise.
Now, evolutionarily, would we have had exposure to infrared exclusively in the mornings, or would it be at kind of full spectrum throughout the day? So I heard them talk. I heard the Jude guys talk on Dave Asprey recently, and they said, talked a little bit about how infrared has an interesting effect on how the body uses UV. So, midday we get more UV, and they said,
interesting.
One way to attenuate sunburn is to have more infrared in the morning because you naturally have this natural progressive spectrum. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. I don't know anything about that stuff.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be surprised if there's,
Man, super interesting. And it's awesome that this is coming to fruition because I think, I'm particularly paranoid by the yellow glasses. I'm with the, not paranoid, but aware of blue light.
Yeah.
Because it absolutely affects my mood, the way my brain functions, and my sleep. 100%.
Yeah. Oh, me too.
Yeah.
I have a condition. It's called corneal erosion.
Okay.
So my cornea, the outside layer of cells in my eye, it tears, it rips, probably because I had such crappy dietary and health habits when I was doing my PhD early on. And it's unbelievable. It's super photosensitive.
Right.
So if I look at light, even like a red alarm clock in the middle of the night, if that tears open, it's just excruciating pain.
Really?
I have to wear an eye patch like a pirate all day when I go to work and stuff like that when I have these
How often does that
flare-ups. It never happens anymore because I put cream in my eye. So it happens when it dries out, when my eye dries out. So it's amazing because it's my own inflammation sensor, because if I don't put the cream in, if I eat gluten, I get a flare-up. If I eat a ton of sugar, I get a flare-up. If I get stressed out, don't have sleep, I get a flare up.
But the
every
irony
time.
of life, right? How your greatest, right? It's like a curse, but it becomes your greatest blessing because
I can tell what my body is sensitive to.
Right, and it probably has in some way influenced your desire to research this stuff because you're like, this is real, right? There's really something here. If nothing happened when you ate gluten, you'd be like, yeah, people are full of crap.
Yeah, no, it took me a long time. I was in the conventional scientific, world in that regard in terms of gluten. I thought it was silly. I thought there wasn't anything to it. And then, throughout the years, I've realized I'm super sensitive to it.
Yeah.
And what it took for me was my daughter. She was getting basically loose stools, like basically diarrhea literally from the point she was born to like a year and a half. It took me, it's embarrassing to say, but it took me like over a year to figure it out.
Right.
And I discovered that through breastfeeding, gluten goes through breast milk.
Wow.
And I've looked at studies on that. Obviously, when she started eating, all these baby foods, they're doing the whole grains, and it cleared right up when we took her off. And then I said, okay, there's definitely something here. My wife tinkered with it. I tinkered with it. We discovered she's not too sensitive to it. I'm super sensitive to it. It made a huge impact on me. And then I'm saying, why? Who's been lying to me? What's going on?
Right. Have you looked at your DNA for that? Like, is there
there's genes that are involved in basically intestinal strength, but there's not good genetic markers for gluten sensitivity. There's some that indicate you might be more susceptible, but there's not consistent. With dairy, there's consistent ones that you can almost predict, consistently whether you're sensitive to dairy based on your DNA, in my experience. Now, people argue all this stuff, right? Everybody argues everything. But from my consulting, I find a lot of, dairy is dictated a lot by genetics. I think the gluten thing is more complicated because it's epigenetic. It must be. It probably based on, the genes that are involved in how strong your intestine is, how rigorous is your intestinal wall, which we can look at, and I do identify those genes, but also what your parents ate, what your grandparents ate, and how active were they.
That's such a beautiful thing that, we can identify these things now, and hopefully this current generation can begin to take ownership for, hey, if you ever want to have kids, start paying attention.
Right.
It's so important.
Yeah. So this is FGF with and without infrared. FGF1, these are growth factor genes.
Yep.
And other scientists have found changes in FGF.
So you're seeing a decrease after 5 minutes.
Yeah, but that's not significant because it's, basically you're not seeing anything with FGF1 because of the error bar. So I ran multiple experiments here. And so, if you factor in all the experiments, really there's no change. But with FGF7, you see a huge change, huge increase in growth factor 7, FGF7. Which is different because that one's more involved in lung development, but also repair and repair mechanisms. Yeah. And so that was interesting. And then that change drops off dramatically after 10 minutes. So again, everything that I've done.
Almost like a detriment after 10 minutes?
I don't think so. It's probably an adaptive response your cells have, and then it's just like hormones, right? Like they downregulate their response pretty quick. So the optimal benefits within 10 minutes.
So may it be the type of thing where if you really wanted to see these growth and repair things, maybe you would do 10 minutes 3 times a day. So you increase the frequency.
Yeah, I know guys that do
rather than duration.
Yeah. And a lot of athletes are doing stuff like this. And there's not a lot of good studies there's no studies really that you can argue one way or the other. But you can base it just on this, and I think it's a lot less stressful on your body than exercise. So if you're exercising 3 times a day every day, you're way overtraining, right? But if you're doing it with an infrared, I don't think you're overtraining. And that's the benefit of infrared on top of the training is it can add a lot of physiological exercise-like effects, side effects almost.
Right. And have you explored at all the implications of a single spectrum of light versus a full spectrum that you would get with the sun?
I haven't, no. Right now I'm just using
just
that
this one
specific Juve without the red. Yeah.
With the red?
No, I'm using the one without the red.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just the infrared wavelengths. I think I'd have to double check. Maybe it is with the red.
Yeah, I don't know.
They have 2 options. They have one it's got multiple different wavelengths, and then one that's just one of the wavelength ranges. And I have that one because it's more specific in terms of trying to identify what's going on, you know, and you always want to decrease your variables.
Are these human stem cells you're looking at primarily?
Fat cells from human patients at the Mayo Clinic,
Runt related. Oh, what's that one?
So RUNX this is a little bit specific to me and my interests because I'm in an orthopedic surgery department. So I'm interested in bone development, and stem cells are definitely, I mean, infrared definitely impacts your bones. So RUNX is a gene called runt-related transcription factor. It's involved in bone osteoblastic differentiation, so bone formation, bone development. So in other words, if you're an athlete, right, you want those strong bones. And this gene, I mean, look at that huge difference between no infrared and infrared. At 5 minutes, you get a massive jump in RUNX expression. So you're changing genetic expression, right? So a transcription factor, what that does is it binds DNA and then switches it on, right? You're basically switching on transcription. Right. And the transcription factor, it's not just one gene. It's a transcription factor that binds multiple places on your DNA. So you're turning on a lot of genes in concert.
Now,
and they're related to bone.
Is the next step for this, like, okay, we've identified this happens acutely. Is the next step doing like a 30-day or a 60-day trial with a cohort and actually seeing if you see a physiological change?
I think so.
Is that did we start doing that yet?
Nope.
No, that'd be a great next step, right? Like here's 30 people, like do this for 30 days, and let's actually see if there's a physiological change in all these in like your manifestation.
Or in mice, right? Usually start in some kind of an animal because then you can cut their knee open and take all kinds of chunks from everything.
Well, Trevor, my producer, donated his knee, man. He said he's donated for science.
Yeah, that's the hard part, right? But a lot of these people going into surgery, the surgeons are already in there. So they're happy to take a chunk out, especially if it's collagen or something, like a scar.
You don't need this. You know? Get some extra. Take some extra collagen, you'll be good.
And fat, that's the beauty of fat. Everybody's happy to donate fat.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, this is alkaline phosphatase. So this one is involved in bone mineralization, bone strength. Again, infrared increases that. So there's a really strong relationship between infrared and bone density.
Have you guys looked at any negative markers from infrared, or that would be like?
For sure.
Everything you're seeing seems like it's all positive. This is all great.
Well, no, I looked at TGF-beta, a lot of these inflammatory markers, and they were not up. So I'm not even showing you them because they were all flat. But other people have shown that after a certain amount of time, right, you get that inflammatory response. So that's why you don't want to overdo it. But that's true of exercise, right? That's true of anything, I think.
That's not true of exercise.
You get the inflammatory.
You can exercise all day and you're absolutely fine. I don't know what you're talking about. Just teasing. Heat shock proteins. So this is with infrared as well.
So the reason I was looking at heat shock proteins is because heat saunas, of course, this is a massive benefit, right, to using a sauna.
So you're seeing a benefit after just 5 to 10 minutes. So that's why you just did you use 10 minutes today?
Yeah, that's what I always do.
Gosh.
I consider it kind of the minimal effective dose, like getting your sun. You know, you don't want to get sunburned. Just get out there, get what you need.
I like getting extremely uncomfortable in the sauna. Like I like to get to the point where I'm about to panic, and then I get out.
Well, and that's the thing is I think there's an adaptive response, right? So these cells are not adapted.
Right.
This is just one experiment. This is probably the first time they've been exposed to infrared. I'll bet you, and I haven't done this study, but I'll bet you if you started hitting them with infrared every day for a week or two, or they would start adapting, and it would take longer. You'd have to get up to 30 minutes. So I think that's a legitimate thing to do.
Yeah, I know all Rhonda Patrick talks about is like it has to be very uncomfortable.
Yeah,
and I'm like, okay, I can do it.
Your body's good at telling you.
I like it, man. Like you're going for that panic mode, right? You're like, I have to get out. Okay, now I'm ready to go. When I feel like I have to get out, I wait 5 more minutes and then I go.
Yeah, that's what I do too. What I do is I listen to a podcast so that I'm distracted enough so I'm not thinking about it.
Yeah, but my phone always overheats.
I prop in a towel.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the sauna I have access to is it's one of those steam saunas. And they filtered the water with carbon and everything, thankfully, at the Mayo Clinic. Yeah, which is exceptional.
God, you're at the Mayo Clinic. They better be doing everything like that, right?
Well, you'd think, but some places you never know. But no, they do because I've inquired. And in fact, one day the water was running black because something went wrong with the charcoal. So I know for sure they've got activated charcoal in there, which is a thumbs up for me.
Yeah, and Ben Greenfield did a podcast with, I forget the guy's name, Brian something, where he went in Ben's house and started checking all of the house,
EMF type stuff. Yeah.
So his sauna was loaded with radio frequencies and EMF.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's a huge concern. So he's like, you're basically sitting in there and radiating yourself.
Yeah.
So we had ours tested. Ours was good, but cell phone in there, I'm like, man, maybe we shouldn't be bringing a cell phone in there, you know? So I was like, gosh, because you're literally in a little radiated box.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so much exposure. What I try and do is just turn it on airplane at night.
Yeah.
And keep it away from my bed. I know guys that sleep on their phone.
Right, with it under the pillow.
Under the pillow with the alarm on. Scientists.
Yeah. No listeners out there do that at all. They got to check their Instagram as soon as they wake up. I need a dopamine fix as soon as I wake up.
But yeah, I mean, but you can see the expression is pretty low relative to some of these. The numbers are in the hundreds here, but for the heat shock proteins, the numbers are real low. So cells aren't, these particular stem cells I'm looking at aren't making a lot of heat shock protein to begin with.
Right.
That's why it's called relative expression. So not a huge heat shock response, but that's just because they don't have a lot of heat shock protein. But that's the summary of kind of my recent, like last week's infrared experiments with stem cells. Yeah.
Oh, man.
It's kind of off topic from DNA.
No,
fun.
It's honestly incredible because it's this whole biohacking piece. I don't know if I told you, but I want to turn this gym into more of a biohacking center, right? Like, gym is awesome, but it's such a small piece of the puzzle. Like, we're the best in the world at building muscle. Great. But unless you're taking care of all these other things in the back end, nothing else matters. Yeah. Taking care of your health, taking care of your brain. So I want to okay, what do we have to do? What are the best modalities out there? And one thing I've been messing with is the Nano V. If you ever try that, you'll try it before you go. It's awesome. It's just basically a easy water, structured water vapor.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, super cool. Works really, really well. And you actually feel a difference. So I'd love to have you do some tests on that, man. Like, I could probably get you connected with the company.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have time, but man, as far as cognitive function, as far as cellular energy.
I'd be interested to check the mitochondria function.
Oh, man, I feel awesome. I'd love to see some data. I know they have a ton of data. I can send you some stuff.
Cool.
But that's one thing that I've loved. And the infrared light is the next thing. It's been, no question, makes a difference.
Yeah.
And I'm the world's biggest skeptic, right? Like, my bullshit radar is always ringing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and there's some things like vitamin D, right?
Yeah.
Like, you take it, you don't feel the difference usually. But it's still, if you're checking your blood, there's definitely optimal ranges. And, sometimes you have to trust the science if you're not physically feeling a difference.
Yeah, and then there's the argument of you can't have it too high, and then there's the people that say like, if you get over this number, it's gonna be detrimental. And
with vitamin D or infrared or both. I mean, pretty much
vitamin
anything.
D, yeah. So at some point, I have all the data or all the people that I kind of associate with said, you can't get the vitamin D too high. You should be taking 5,000 IUs a day. And then you start seeing data of, no, it's gonna be detrimental. So who knows?
There's always debate. Yeah. And that's the difficulty with research is everybody's using a different type of cell or a different animal or a different this and that. And sometimes you have to just use common sense to piece some of it together. Sure. I mean, when the native tribes live around the equator, around 100 just naturally. Yeah, I think, certainly we should be above 50.
Right. So the summary of all this is infrared light works.
Yeah.
Provided it's the right spectrum and the right amount and potentially the right frequency.
Correct.
So as far as the physical benefits people will see, as far as physical manifestations, energy, potentially bone mineral increase.
Enhancing bone density.
Mitochondrial influences.
For sure. Nitric oxide release, ATP increase. So that's energy related.
Would you recommend taking it pre-workout?
Infrared pre-workout?
Infrared pre-workout?
Sure. Yeah.
You think
most guys do it after. But
I do it after.
I think it doesn't matter probably. I mean, maybe it does. There's no studies, so it's completely arbitrary.
And shine it directly on your melon.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a big one. Yeah. The Alzheimer's stuff is really compelling.
Huge. How about on your testicles?
I haven't really seen the studies.
I'll wait the next time we get together. There'll be some research on that.
I want to see the testosterone. Yeah,
so that's what, Ben Greenfield.
I have a hunch that it does increase testosterone because it increases all these things that are related.
Yeah. I know Ben Greenfield speaks about shining it on his junk.
Yeah. He's pioneering on that one.
Yeah, but I mean, most people are going to stand in front of it naked if you're going to do it, right?
Sure.
You're exposed. Just
I don't have any issue.
Yeah.
I mean, basically opening up those calcium channels, increasing ATP, releasing nitric oxide, you're probably increasing testosterone. Yeah. Makes sense to me.
Very interesting.
But I haven't seen this.
And combining it with a sauna,
Yeah,
good idea about it. Yeah,
I think heat is it's unique actually. A lot of people lump it into the same category. They say, yeah, infrared,
right,
regular sauna, doesn't matter, just do it. I think they're both super powerful and unique in their own ways. I think if you do infrared sauna only, make sure you have enough heat, because you do want that sweat response. You want that heat response. And as you saw here, these cells are increasing their heat shock proteins, and that's not without heat. Like, this isn't a heat system. I'm just shining light on the cells. So even without the heat, with infrared, you're increasing heat shock proteins, which is healthy. But I think personally you want sweat too, because sweat does get rid of phthalates and BPA. There's a lot of studies on that stuff.
Right. So we didn't talk about that too much last time.
Yeah.
What amount? So like if I want, I know you did 10 minutes, but if I want to get rid of, xenoestrogens and phthalates and is it just 10 minutes in the sauna? Or is it?
Yeah, I think so. 11 is, so they've done those studies with Jari Laukkanen, these multi-year, these 20 plus year.
But they're using very high heat, right?
Yeah. But they find that the sweet spot in terms of decreasing all-cause mortality is between 11 and 20 minutes. And I think
what temperature do they use?
I don't know, but pretty
high,
hot.
like 230 or something?
I don't know, but yeah, they're Scandinavians. It's definitely heat. But those guys, I mean, one of the reasons they're increasing all-cause mortality, one of the reasons they're living longer, I think, because they're excreting phthalates, they're excreting BPA. Nobody's has specifically connected that. I mean, that's a 20-year study in humans. That's expensive, But I mean, without a doubt, right? Again, it comes back to common sense.
When you hold that study, I'm the first guy to sign up for it.
Yeah, when I do.
I'm just going to make sweat lodges in the back of the gym.
Well, they've done nicotine patches without the nicotine. Yeah. Where you have guys that sit in a sauna, people that aren't sitting in a sauna, and guys, I mean men and women on these studies, and then they show that the people in the sauna are sweating out a ton of phthalates and BPA. So you definitely want to get that sweat to excrete that, and I think jump right in the shower, get that off. Use some soap, get it off your skin, because your skin loves to hang on.
Hopefully a shower that has a chlorine filter, so you're not reabsorbing the chlorine.
Yeah.
It's a big thing too, right? Because your cells are all open. Yeah. And it gets the chlorine.
With the heat,
Yeah.
And the fluoride and all that stuff.
Damned if you do.
It's a rabbit hole too.
Well, you have to be a
That's another thing
ninja.
I learned when I first started recognizing that there's a lot of dogma in science that's not true. I dug into the fluoride thing because I've got kids and I want to know. And I learned, man, it's a mess out there with that. And I side on the get away from fluoride side, like stay away from it.
What did you find?
Well, so back in the 80s, they did studies with cows' teeth, bovine teeth. They extracted the teeth and put them in acid, like hydrochloric acid, which supposedly imitates your mouth environment, which is fine. And then they did that with and without fluoride. And they found the teeth that were in acid with fluoride didn't degrade as much. And they showed that with x-rays. All right. And that spawned this massive amount of research in fluoride and putting it in water and all this shenanigans. But then just recently, they redid that study, literally exactly the same, except they went up in dose with fluoride. So they did it with doses, but they went way beyond the dose that was done in the 80s and went up to like 5,000 parts per million, 50,000, I can't remember, way beyond what we would normally do. And they used much better technology for imaging the teeth, the enamel. They used some kind of tomography. They used multiple techniques. It wasn't just x-rays. And they found no difference with the fluoride in that same seminal study.
Right.
And basically all these other studies coming in with cities that have fluoride in their water, cities that don't have fluoride, it's completely a crapshoot. It's 50-50 whether you're going to see more cavities, less cavities. It doesn't seem to matter if you're really honest and you're really looking at it. And there's so many neurological detriments. There's so many problems with having fluoride that it's not even benefiting your teeth.
Right.
I mean, if you really are looking at the studies, now, of course, there's biased studies just like soy and all this stuff. But if you really get into it and you're really being honest with yourself, I don't know why they would want fluoride to be pushed so much.
Well, because what else are you going to sew toothpaste for? Like, other than making your breath smell fresh, like kids don't need that. They need, you need fluoride because you're
scrubbing off all the sugar.
Yeah, right, yeah. Yes.
But yeah, I mean, the fluoride component, it's amazing how we're straddling this line between neurotoxic levels and acceptable levels with brushing. I mean, if you're swallowing 1,000th of your toothpaste, it's it's borderline neurotoxic levels, you know, based on studies.
Really?
Oh yeah. And I've done the numbers, and I've, again, done YouTube on that, because right now I don't have the studies in front of me and I don't have these numbers memorized in terms of the parts per million. But I've done that calculation, and I was pretty surprised, blown away, really.
So
like,
for all those kids out there that ate toothpaste as a child.
Yeah. It's even worse. Yeah. And then you're on top of that, you're drinking it all the time in your water. Wow. Ugh, you know, I don't think it's
Does
worth
carbon
it.
filters get rid of that?
Nope. That's the only problem, right? So the carbon is great because you're getting the estrogens out, which I think is more important. I think if you had to choose, right, which you don't have to just choose one. But if you had to choose, get the estrogens out, because that's a multi-generational health impact. But yeah, get them both out, right? I mean, you're messing up your thyroid gland, you're messing up your brain. You know, there's a definite relationship between high levels of fluoride, high regions with high fluoride, and Alzheimer's. There's a total association there.
Killing the nervous system.
Yeah. So that alone, right? But there's a laundry list of problems with high fluoride, and you could probably say it doesn't have to be that high to start getting some of those symptoms. You just may not see them clinically. So it's not a risk that's worth taking, because it doesn't benefit your teeth. You know,
now,
you get it from your diet. You get it if you eat healthy organic foods. You get a low level, and that's what you need, and you're good.
Right. So for a guy who fishes as much as you do, what are your concerns about our current oceans?
Mercury. Yeah.
Mercury.
Yeah, no.
And estrogen, maybe?
Yeah, for sure.
All the damn plastic in these things?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a big concern for sure.
So
I mean, the biggest problem with the estrogens is just killing off the fertility. So whether we're eating it or not, right, is less of a concern to me. It's just the populations are crashing out. It's killing the coral reef species. Are they doing it on purpose? I don't think so. It's probably just commercialism and laziness. And I mean, I just heard Valentine Thomas, I think was her name, on Joe Rogan. She's a professional spear fisher. Mm-hmm. And she was talking about how it's legal for these ships that are out in the ocean to dump their trash in the ocean as long as you're 2 miles offshore. And 2 miles is nothing, man. I've kayaked 2 miles offshore to fish sharks, you know?
Yeah.
And they're dumping all this garbage into the ocean. Of
it's
course,
legal?
It's legal, she said. And I believe her.
In certain countries or everywhere?
Everywhere. And people are doing it. So we're just loading up our trash in our oceans.
Unbelievable, man.
I thought so too. I can't believe how silly that is.
Who governs that? Like, it has to be like country by country or what? I
don't know.
Like, how can we piss people off enough to say, like, stop fucking doing this shit?
Yeah.
God, that's ridiculous.
Well, so the mercury, I think, is a more...
Where's the mercury coming from?
So they use it as a preservative in herbicides and pesticides because it kills bacteria. So it increases the shelf life. Just like vaccines, right?
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So they put it in vaccines also for the same reason. So that if you get a bacteria that gets into that substance, so say you've got a herbicide sitting on a shelf, get bacteria in there, they start degrading the stuff. So you don't want that. So you put mercury in so those bacteria die, right? And it's low dose, but you're spraying these giant fields. It's running off, bioaccumulating in the algae and the minnows, working up the food chain, and then it ultimately really bioaccumulates in the bigger fish. So yeah, I don't keep, like if I catch a 10-foot shark, I don't keep that. If we catch a little 4 or 5 footer young one, keep that for sure. So they accumulate more over time. And I'm sure that's true of the estrogens, but I haven't seen a good study on fish specifically and how much they're getting. I've seen plenty of studies on polar bears, on sea otters, on dolphins, on whales. They have all those studies showing parabens, massive paraben stores in their fat. And in humans and pregnant women, they're always concerned about, so they look at that. So there's enough evidence where you can make conclusions from the evidence we have and kind of expand it and say, yeah, I'm sure it's storing up in the fish too. But fish aren't that fatty, so they don't. So what I do when I fillet fish is I cut off the fat. So right next to the skin, there's usually a layer of fat that doesn't taste good anyways because they store a lot of toxins in there. And you can see it, especially on fatty fish like a catfish. You know, if you look at the skin side of a catfish fillet, you take the skin off, there's like this whitish, shiny layer. You cut that off, and you see it on the salmon too. You see that gray layer. There's like a thin layer of gray.
Yeah.
Cut that off. It tastes gross. You know, and that's getting rid of all that. Unfortunately, it should be good DHA fat, but,
DHA plus mercury plus
yep.
parabens.
Yep.
Gosh.
So I cut that off, and then I cut the lateral lines off because that's usually where there's bones and there's a lot of toxin that stores on the lateral line, which people would just have to Google to see what that means. What's a lateral line? So yeah, it's a mess out there. And that's why I'm so glad that there's this anti-plastic movement, because some people are purely in it for the environment. Some people are in it for their own personal health. Some people are in it for all the right reasons. Some people are in it for all the wrong reasons. I don't care, but I'm glad the movement is happening.
So here's the thing, man. Having started supplement companies now, I've been reaching out to all these companies to try to find alternative solutions. They don't exist, and someone needs to create them. And small ones, like some exist, but there's always a bigger downside, it seems, with these alternative solutions. So an example being, if you have a liquid product you're trying to sell.
They're storing in plastic.
They're storing in plastic. But
right.
Even if you tried to get metal, right, there's going to be
metallic flavor.
Exactly. There's going to be toxins leaking from the metal. Even if you tried to get, now they're doing recycled materials, so like a compostable material, where you're gonna have seepage from that. And then you go glass. Okay, but glass, as soon as you put oil in a glass, it's no longer recyclable. So that now they're like, it's gonna take 400 to 500 years for that to decompose. And we're like, oh, okay, so we're like, we really have no other solution. So
I think glass is the ultimate current.
It seems that way.
But that's one of the reasons the whole food diet is so good, because with the whole foods,
there's no containers.
Yeah, you're not doing containers, right? Like I go out, I shoot a moose, I wrap it. I literally bring, wax paper, which is actual wax, not plastic wrap. I bring wax paper, wrap it up, and I do put it in plastic Ziplocs because, otherwise it's falling out. Mm-hmm. And then I vacuum seal it and store it in the freezer, but it's not sitting in plastic, And so I do it myself. And if you get a good butcher, they're wrapping.
You vacuum seal it with what? It's plastic.
A vacuum sealing.
But it's plastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is.
I use plastic.
So it's sitting in plastic.
You almost have to preserve it.
Yeah.
So no, it's not sitting in plastic though, because it's already wrapped in wax paper first. So that's my personal solution. And I buy a whole cow also, and they wrap it with. I make sure that it's just butcher paper, But the problem is with the burger meat, right? It's all over the place if you're just doing that. So ultimately you do need some plastic, but most people aren't even thinking at all about it. And so I think you can cut back massively in a lot of ways. And we've already talked about the health benefits of doing that, from the phthalates to the
We've taken out a lot of plastic, man, but it's very hard to take it all out. Like single-use plastic is the objective. So, straws and Ziploc bags is one, that's such a part of our culture now.
Yeah,
like everyone needs to go in a Ziploc bag.
Well, they do have great alternatives now. They're coming out with silicone.
I've got
Silicone's great.
Yeah.
No, and I think that's what people need to do, including myself. Mm-hmm. I just don't know how you can vacuum seal silicone. I don't think you could.
The problem with the silicone, those bags, is if you put anything in there that's liquid or wet, they get gross.
Yeah,
because they're hard to clean on the inside.
Yeah.
So, but then glass for kids. They're like, oh, cool, kids got to carry big glass containers, and they're carrying 30-pound lunch bags to school. Everything seems to have a problem. Plastic has become such a huge part of our culture. Well, I'm just making excuses, to be honest. We could absolutely make a change, and we are.
Well, yeah, I think people are, now that they're recognizing there's the health issues. And I don't think plastics, in terms of health, are inherently bad, but they are when there's phthalates there, and they are when there's BPA or BPS.
Well, when is there not?
A lot, actually. A lot of plastics don't have phthalates. They don't need to put them in there. Like plastic number 2, plastic 4, plastic 5 on the recycling symbols. Those ones, only about 10 or 15% of the time have phthalates. At least it's not 100% of the time, right? So it's kind of a crapshoot because you don't really know, but it's a better odds. So you're playing an odds game. But I think if governments just made phthalates illegal, and there's a lot of
why would they put phthalates in there? Where are they coming from?
Because it's cheaper. So they use them in perfumes because it carries the fragrance farther in the air, and it's cheap, mainly because it's cheap. But they say it's because it carries the perfume farther. And they use it in plastics because it improves the clarity, the rigidity, it gives it certain properties that you can tinker with whatever you want in terms of the plastic. But there's alternatives, but they're a cent cheap. They're a cent more. They cost just a tiny, tiny bit more.
Right.
But if they were illegal, people would use them for sure. They would use the natural, alternatives.
Right.
And you can't right now because the fact that they're legal forces you to use them to compete financially, or your company goes under. And that's why the laws are so important.
Is that only in America, or is that in most places from your experience?
Well, with the estrogen stuff, there's no question Europe is far, far more strict.
Yeah.
And that's because there's not so much financial connection to the government. I know a guy, Michael Skinner, he gave a TED talk on epigenetics. And I had lunch with him, talked to him a lot. And he gave a talk in Europe about a fungicide. I think it was called vinclozolin, and the health impacts on your epigenetics, you know, these marks in your DNA and how bad it is for you. He gave a talk in Europe 2 weeks later that they outlawed that chemical.
The whole
he had a bunch of, he said he had a bunch of people with suits in the audience, you know, from the presumably government officials. But either way, they heard about it. They outlawed it. In America, it's still legal. And that talk was like 5 years ago, you know? So, I mean, it's a really frustrating system because, yeah, it's cheaper to spray these things with fungicides and just let the, you know, then you don't have to take care of your farm as much to the high degrees that you would otherwise, or you wouldn't have to use more expensive natural products, whatever. There's financial incentive, which means there's political motivation.
Sure.
That's where the mess comes from.
Man, it seems like we're, you know, and we talk to people about this all the time, is like, do you have to be neurotic about it? I think the answer is you need to be diligent without being neurotic, right?
Yeah,
like you got to pay attention. And, you know, some people go through their life without paying attention to what they're putting in their body or where it's coming from or where it's being sourced. I love your approach of I hunt, I fish, and most of the stuff I eat, I've killed myself. Yeah. At the very least, you're like, hey, man, I know how it's packed. I know what's going in. I know what I was eating for the most part many times. That's such a big thing. And if you had asked me that 3 to 4 years ago, I wasn't even on my worldview. But now I'm of the mentality of like, hey, how do I start, you know, moving to a farm where I can grow my own vegetables, grow my own meat?
That's the ultimate. Yeah. You got to just do it yourself to some degree. If
man,
you really
I think
want.
I'm leaning toward that sooner rather than later. Like, you know, we talked about, I want to learn how to hunt. You know, fishing is fishing relatively. I mean, maybe not at your level, but like it's, you know, level of competence is relatively low, I think, necessarily. Yeah, man, I think it seems like the next transition. Was it you that said, or maybe it was Benjamin Bickman that said, all athletes will be, in the next 10 years, like Olympic athletes will all be growing their own food. If you actually want to stay ahead in athletics, like the only way is you have to be growing your own food. You have to be paying attention to where it's coming from.
You at least have to be super keyed in. Yeah. I mean, that's my experience consulting right now because I work with pro athletes. And, you know, these guys are all coming into the programs gluten-free, grain-free, you know, like hyper-optimized, which is why I do DNA consulting for them because we want to tweak it even more. You don't want to do unnecessary things. You don't want to unnecessarily burden yourself, but you definitely don't want to be inhibiting muscle growth by eating dairy products or drinking dairy or whatever if that's not genetically appropriate for you.
Right. So, man, let's get to it.
Let's do DNA.
I'm super excited. So the ultimate point of the original point of the conversation was to look at my DNA and actually talk about it. Not only just look at mine, that's kind of a vehicle, but understanding what these things are. And I think it's important for people to realize because I don't even realize what we can actually look at. There's so many things that we are relatively familiar with what their influence is on our body, right? Like potentially hundreds or thousands of things we know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man, there's thousands of studies on a lot of these genes. It's unbelievable how many studies are out there. And a lot of them debate amongst themselves, this, that, and the other thing. So you can cherry pick. But, you know, so you have to kind of have a research background, I think, to really get it at the deepest level. But you can do a lot. And I think one of the best examples of the power of your genetics are the SNPs, right? And how much they've been studied. And probably a specific example is the red blood cell disease, sickle cell anemia. And literally that can be caused by one single DNA change called a SNP, single nucleotide polymorphism. You change that one letter on your code and you get sickle cell.
Wow.
That's a big impact from one letter of code out of 4 billion. We have 4 billion base pairs.
And that could be influenced through epigenetics, not just genetics.
No. So if that one is genetic, and that's where it's really interesting, and that's kind of the fine line that I'm trying to straddle, is understanding. Yeah, you've got this genetic impact. You're always going to have a dysfunctional protein, right? If that gene is translated into a protein ultimately, you're going to have a dysfunctional protein. no matter what. If your genetics, if the code is faulty, like say you're building a house and you've got a crappy blueprint.
Yeah.
And you've got people that don't know how to think and they're just following the blueprint, they're going to make a crappy house every single time from that blueprint. Mm-hmm. And so no matter what your epigenetics are, if you've got a dysfunctional protein from your DNA code, it's just going to be dysfunctional, and you got to know about it and you can optimize it. You can work around it. It doesn't mean it's totally dysfunctional. It just means it's less than optimal.
Got it.
So like a good example of that would be an enzyme that utilizes magnesium to function. And we'll probably talk specifics here, but for now, let's just introduce that, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're suboptimal with your magnesium levels, you're going to have even more dysfunction. Mm-hmm. So you identify a gene like that, and again, this is just an abstract gene. Let's just pretend it's a real one for now. If it's a gene that's dysfunctional, but it requires magnesium to function, you want to make sure that you've always got plenty of magnesium around, and that's going to help you optimize, and you'll really notice his benefit from magnesium compared to just the next guy who doesn't have that dysfunction.
Right.
And that's my experience, is that, I'm looking for genes that I can simplify for people and give them actionable methods to actually impact their health, and it does. That's the cool thing, is it really does. Whereas epigenetics, right, that's a more environmental difference. So you screw up your epigenetics by poor posture, poor diet, poor lifestyle, poor sleep.
Posture is going to affect your epigenetics?
Oh, yeah.
Because we both, as every listener sits up
straight. Well, because it alters your hormones, it alters your electricity, your electrical signaling, all kinds of things. So, and all of those things influence the in fact, gut bacteria influence your epigenetics, and they have their own epigenetics, and most people aren't even thinking about that. And get this, inside your cell, you've got a nucleus, right, where your DNA is, and that's coated in its own membrane, but you also have a mitochondria sitting in there, and that's got its own DNA. That's bacterial DNA. It's circular.
Right.
And that has epigenetic marks. Epigenetic marks are marks on top of the DNA. Right? So the way I explain epigenetics is musical notes.
Yeah.
So like if you had black dots on a staff, that would be your DNA. And I could give that piece of paper that had the black dots, and you could play a song. You could replicate it. You could give it to, anybody else in the gym. They'd be playing that song. And that's your DNA, right? Simple, not a lot of change. If you'd made a change, it would cause the song to change. But where epigenetics come in, it's the chords. Right? It's when you put notes on top of those notes and you play a more complex song, and you can pass those on too, right? Because if you change the chord, you can pass that on to the next generation and the next generation. And we're certainly finding that 4+ generations out, not just 3 generations, 4.
Crazy.
Yeah. And so you're altering those marks on top of the DNA, those musical notes, those complex notes, you're altering, but because they're easier to change. They're easier to manipulate with good posture, good hormone levels, good all of that stuff.
I'm so grateful that this is coming to fruition, because it just really says that you got to step up with your life, because some people don't care about their life, right? People maybe not our demographic, but a lot of people don't. But if you start to realize, like, hey, this is going to affect your kids and your kids' kids, and ultimately everyone in the world will be influenced by the decisions you make. That's so powerful.
Yeah, that's why there was just an article in GQ talking about like the potential for humanity to just completely become infertile because we keep exposing ourselves to these estrogens, and it's well known that they impact your epigenetics, and you pass that, and it increases your infertility, or it decreases your fertility, however you want to say it. And it's well known that happens that gets passed to the next generation. So your fertility gets worse and worse in subsequent generations. And so there's a valid concern that we're doing this, at least based on animal studies. We're adversely digging ourselves in a hole that we might never get out of. And I'm more optimistic than that, but we don't know. But the DNA, but back to the DNA.
Yeah.
Right? Because we could talk epigenetics all day. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to write a book on epigenetics and another book on DNA, because I think they go hand in hand. You can't completely just have one. You can't completely have the other. And people need to understand the difference between the two and the power of both of them, because they're both super powerful.
So will the book just be very theoretical on how to understand them, or will it be some action items like, hey, when you have
for sure,
this?
Action.
Okay.
Yeah. Especially, no, for sure, both of them. I mean, the epigenetics, it's harder because you can't get your epigenetics sequenced. You can't go to 23 and say, hey, check the marks on top of my DNA. Because that's way more complicated. Right? Yeah, that's definitely in the future. Yeah. The problem with epigenetics, there's another layer of complexity that I'm kind of hiding from you, and that is histones. So your DNA gets wrapped around these things called histones, they're proteins, and those have marks. Those get marked, and that's another form of epigenetics. So you have marks directly on the DNA, and then you also have marks on these proteins, and that makes it way more complicated because it's really difficult to determine the marks on those proteins, those histones. And it might even change from cell to cell. So you've got two cells sitting right next to each other in your muscle, two muscle cells. And if you were able to pull out one and then take a laser and pull out the other one, which you can do, and look at the epigenetics of those cells on the histones, the marks, it might be different. Yeah. But usually they're pretty consistent globally.
Gosh.
Yeah. So that's where it gets complicated and kind of hinders the future research. People are too optimistic sometimes about, science is, it's going to be easy in 10 years, right? But that part of it's going to be difficult. Yeah. That's a challenge. But the marks on the DNA directly, those ones are well within our grasp in terms of using them to improve our health. But the DNA is more practical now. And that's why I do it. You can look at your DNA and at least, like, let's say you've got a dairy issue. And let's say I look at your DNA and you don't have any genes for that. That means you probably messed it up, your epigenetics.
Right. Which you can potentially change.
Which you can change, yeah. And what you probably did in that case is you probably stressed yourself out or ate a bunch of things that were disruptive to your gut. Mm-hmm. You punched holes in your gut. Dairy proteins were flooding in. You react to them. And your immune system maintained that reaction, that memory. The immune cells retained that memory of that reaction. And
apparently your immune system never forgets an immune reaction. Apparently you always develop antibodies to it.
Yeah. So, and that's one of the reasons people are so reactive to so many things in certain cases, right? You find that like Jordan Peterson's daughter, right? Michaela, I think her name was. Reactive to everything, probably because she had major leaky gut permeability at one point, and all these vegetables are pouring into her bloodstream, and her immune system is just freaking out, reacting to everything. And then throughout the rest of her, life, up to this point at least, her immune system, there's probably genetic components for sure, but I don't think she's genetically
and my brain just
allergic
went down
to everything.
My brain just went down this rabbit hole of looking at my kids and going, okay, their state of mind when they're eating is going to influence their future so much, because if I'm yelling at them because they're not eating their vegetables and they get a stress response, maybe that's going to increase the gut permeability. Yeah. And then they're going to now be resistant to vegetables, which then causes a literal illness when they're eating this stuff.
That's a great point.
Who knows, right?
Yeah, at least to some degree, right? These things are all on degrees. And one of the reasons I think the carnivore diet is working so well for those type of people is because which one is more similar to you, meat or vegetables, right? Yep. Vegetable cells, they're so different than human cells. The cell walls are just completely different, all this stuff. So, of course, your immune system is going to be more sensitive to those type of insults, those changed cell types, compared to meat, right? Which, there's some reactive potential with meat, with sialic acid and all this, but not near the level of plants. You know what I mean? But
you're just ultimately eliminating everything inflammatory with a carnivore diet. And you're like, hey, I know my body tolerates this well. Makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm sure all those people, Chris Bell and all these guys, they've had a point in their life where they've punched so many holes in their intestine.
Well, with the pharmaceuticals, right?
Well, that too.
Chris has been, very open about his addiction to pharmaceuticals. So, that's the worst thing for your gut, right? That's destroying everyone's gut.
Well, it depends on the pharmaceutical, but yeah. And he may have already disrupted it. And then there's always the genetic component of how tough was your gut to begin with, right? A lot of people, in my experience, they've got incredibly strong intestines, like iron stomachs, they call them. People say, I have an iron stomach, I can eat whatever I want. And that might be true, but then you start to see the health impacts on their kids and on their kids. And that's where it starts to come out.
So it's still storing these things.
They still shouldn't have messed up their guts. You know what I mean?
Wow. It's still going to be in your body, even though you're not necessarily feeling the immediate effects.
Yeah, because those gut bacteria retain epigenetic marks, so they have a memory, right? And those get passed on. Just even being in somebody's same environment, you're passing bacteria all the time.
Man, so, as a parent, everything always comes back to being a parent, but I feel like such a massive responsibility now to influence what goes into my kids' bodies, because not just for them, but for their subsequent offspring.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Well, and the good thing about children is they're really resilient. Their metabolisms are a lot better. They
Sure.
can, and that's a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because if they're sensitive to gluten, you probably don't know it because it doesn't manifest. It's kind of like if a teenager gets drunk, they might have a little hangover and then they're good. If you get drunk at age 50 or 40, you're not getting a little bit of a hangover.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's because of metabolic changes. And so children, yeah, they're susceptible to these chemicals, but they bounce back quicker, so it's harder to notice. So I think a lot of the responsibility is on the parents to discover what their health issues are and try and use that knowledge to improve the health of their kids before the children start manifesting a problem. That's kind of my approach.
Man, and like I said, I love to have you look at my son's DNA because he's got this one thing that I know it's something in his diet and I can't pinpoint what it is. So he's got like dark rings under his eyes. And I'm like, I know that's something dietary. And you don't eat gluten very often. Like he eats gluten, I don't know, 4 times a year. And it doesn't seem to make it worse, not immediately. So I'm like, God, what is it? There's something in there that's pissing him off. And I'm wondering if it's dairy. Like I know you'll tell me in a minute, but I have a dairy thing.
I can't even remember because it was a while ago when I looked at your DNA.
Yeah, so I'm
pretty
like,
sure it's on there.
He eats a lot of dairy, but I'm like, usually young kids are okay with dairy. So I'm trying to find that out. But I love that you say.
Let's jump into yours.
Because I love that you say like your parents, up to the parents to be responsible to find out what's wrong with you because you're looking at your kids like I don't see any physical manifestations in my kids. Not energy, sometimes energy, but they sleep well. No digestive issues, no relative illnesses. The only thing I see with my son is that twice a month he'll get these bags under his eyes, and I can't trace it back to anything. Maybe he's sleeping poorly, but why are you sleeping poorly? You're a kid. You should be sleeping like a.
Yeah.
So there's got to be something there.
Yeah, let's try and piece it together. So basically, with the DNA, right? You were asking in the gym this morning when we were lifting.
Yeah.
About SNPs.
Yeah.
And so 23andMe just does SNPs, which stands for single nucleotide polymorphism.
Right.
And that just means a single DNA letter change.
Got it.
The letter code is ATGC. Those are the letters. And so you've got 4 billion of those, right? But within that 4 billion, there's certain regions that are called genes. And I know you know this, but I'm just kind of trying to make it even more simple. And within those genes, right, there's changes between people, and they're consistent. There's consistently SNP differences within certain DNA letters. And the beauty of SNPs is scientists have studied the crap out of them, so that there's thousands and thousands of publications on one SNP in a lot of cases, right? And I mean, dozens of studies on most of these SNPs. And that gives me as a scientist a really good idea of what happens in terms of the health. And the reason for that is because mostly there's not that much difference between people's DNA. But you find a SNP, like say we compare our DNA, which is what they did originally, right? They just did one guy, and there's nobody to compare it to. So how do you know this is a good gene, this is a bad gene? Because you can't compare it. Mm-hmm. But then as we've amassed thousands and literally millions of people's DNA, then scientists have been able to compare databases worth of this stuff and isolate when this code changes in this way, you get this health impact, right? And that's the beauty of SNPs is the volume of studies are just unbelievable. And so there's 2 ways you can do your DNA. You can do a whole genome sequencing, which means it's about $1,000 and you literally know every single letter in your DNA code. All 4 billion of the letters are known. Or you can do the 23andMe type thing where it's $100 and you just know the SNPs, and there's about 500,000 of them. They used to do 1 million, but now they do about 600,000, which is unfortunate. I was really frustrated with them when they lowered their quality of their product. But it's still far superior than other products out there, in my opinion.
Is that the best one?
Yeah, 23andMe.
And shout out to GlaxoSmithKline for having purchased them now, which...
Oh, really? Did they?
You didn't know that? Yeah.
No,
Glaxo purchased them, it was less than a month ago.
Wow.
And which tells you where that's going, right? Like they own everyone's DNA now, which is...
Yeah. It's always
you saw that
privacy is an issue. So what I do with my pro athletes especially, and what I've always done, use an alias when you get your DNA done. And if you buy a bunch of them together, call yourself John Smith or whatever. I mean, I can tell as a scientist if it's a male or a female, but I can't 100% say this is your DNA, if you're using an alias all the way through the process and unchecking all the permissions boxes. And that's what I recommend for people. I know some people have sent me their data via these encrypted email servers in Switzerland, like Proton Mail. I have I have accounts with them myself so that people can do it all encrypted. But I don't think it's not necessary to go there.
Like some people steal your DNA?
No, because you can't do that much with it right now. But there might be in the future.
Like what would they do with it?
Well, the biggest concern is health insurance. So health insurance gets a hold of it and says, you're predisposed to have this issue. We're not going to cover it.
Wow.
Something like that.
Wow.
But there's actually laws against that right now. It's called the GINA Act, I think, GINA. Genome, something. I don't know. I'm not super familiar with the laws, but right now the health insurance companies aren't allowed to do that. And hopefully it stays that way, but you never know, right? Use an alias. It's not that hard.
Sure.
And it's amazing how many people don't. And that's okay too, like if you've already got it, you haven't used an alias, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
But the pro athletes, they're more worried about people taking their DNA data and just exposing it publicly, and who knows, you know what I mean? Like it's just an additional level of privacy intrusion. But anyways, the point is 23andMe, they're super good, frankly. Again, they've downgraded a lot of their detox genes and things that I used to tell people about. So you can't learn quite as much, but they literally have like a 99.9% reproducibility. So if you sent a sample this week and one next week, and it's just a spit sample, you spit in a tube, as you know.
Right.
Yeah. You're going to get the same data. I'm going to get the same data as a scientist, which is a huge relief for me, because you don't want somebody to send two different samples and then have the results be different. And then I don't know, I'm not confident in what I tell you. And there's never 100% confidence. And that's why there's all these silly disclaimers, like it's just entertainment and all this stuff, because you don't want to make too strong of a conclusion, because there's always that option that it might be an error in the software, an error in the DNA sequencing process, something like that.
Right.
So that's always just one of those underlying things, but people are aware of that, right? And it's almost uncanny what I can get from people's DNA. And again, it's because the SNPs are so well characterized by scientists. If you did your whole genome, since they haven't studied most of it, because it's not genes, it's not making a protein, I couldn't tell you anything. I couldn't tell you much more than if you just did your SNPs.
So by testing the whole genome, they're testing the histones, they're testing the epigenetics as well?
No, not the histones, not the epigenetics. No, it's just the DNA code. So epigenetics are the marks on the DNA. You can sequence that, and it costs, the last I checked, I called the company about doing it myself, it was $20,000. And because there's so few people that have done it, you wouldn't even be able to compare it to anybody. Yeah. So I do it at the Mayo Clinic in my lab. I check, what I've been doing is doing next generation sequencing, it's called. Mm-hmm. But that's a whole other can of worms, right? Like I'm looking at RNA expression changes and epigenetic regulators and using software with that. But that's purely research based, what I'm doing for that. And that's going to be important in the future. But for right now, it doesn't impact our health, your health. So we'll just ignore that.
Right, it's for your kids.
Yeah. And for optimizing and all kinds of things, I think, and for everybody, right? Not just me, but it's going to be huge benefits for a lot of people across the board, especially with the stem cell world. But again, and I'm trying to optimize stem cells, because if you're going to inject stem cells, there's a lot of variables. If you take them out of a male compared to if you take them out of a female, it's going to be different. If you take them out of a healthy person compared to an unhealthy person and inject them back in, it's going to be different. If you take them out of this site versus that site in your body, it's going to be different.
Really?
Oh, for sure.
That much?
Yeah, because there's brown fat, there's beige fat that's between white fat and brown fat, full of mitochondria. There's different signals that are right there locally, that are happening. These cells are communicating with molecules, and they change, throughout your body. Maybe seasonal differences, hormone differences. There's a lot of variation. And that's what complicates the stem cell world.
So would you want brown
There's
fat?
A lot of opportunities to optimize.
Would you want to?
I don't know.
You don't know.
Yeah, nobody
Hard
knows, but I think that would be cool.
Yeah.
To isolate stem cells from brown fat. I'm sure that would be really, beneficial, but nobody knows. That's why there's a lot of openings here. The problem is there's a lot of new restrictions legally on using stem cells, and that makes it difficult to motivate the bottom line, right? It makes it difficult to motivate scientists to do the research because the money's not there at the end of the tunnel.
Right.
So then they start shifting away from it. And that's a huge problem. And it might even impact me because I don't have a lot of choice in that. If the institution I'm at says we're not going to place as much emphasis on stem cells, now we just want you to focus on what they're excreting, called exosomes or that sort of thing, because you can patent those. Because it's always about, now it has to be about patentability because there's so much regulation on the stem cell injections now. Right. Then it forces scientists like myself to change our strategies. And that can be an institutional thing. Might not happen, right? But that's inevitable when these laws change. At some point,
yeah. And they're really cracking down. We talked about they're cracking down hard on those stem cell people. And it seems like there's massive benefit, but I get the idea that they just want to make money. And hopefully it's not a worldwide thing, right? Hopefully it's just North America or maybe just the U.S. that says, you can't do stem cells, and everywhere else makes it legal. And
I think so too. That's my hope too, is because I think, as we know, there's a huge difference between somebody's in ketosis and somebody who's just eating standard American, right? Mm-hmm. If you took stem cells out of the keto guy versus the standard American guy, those stem cells would be amazing compared to the standard American. But because most scientists, they don't even know what the word keto means. I was talking to a doctor at the Mayo Clinic, and obviously I'm not going to tell the name or anything, which would be crazy, but he never even heard of the keto diet.
Oh, man.
This was like a few weeks ago. Can you believe this, right? Like, the doctor there, and this is a younger guy, it's not like he's just set in his ways type of thing. Never even heard of the keto diet. And it's like, of course, they don't have a recognition that if you take stem cells out of a keto guy versus a standard American guy, the stem cells are going to be different, and they're going to be a lot healthier from the keto guy because they don't even know what keto means. They don't even know. They don't recognize that as a category.
Since we're on that topic, what are the other dietary or biological influences that would impact stem cell viability, stem cell health?
Everything.
Yeah. So there's nothing else that stands out as things people can do immediately to improve their stem cells. So if I wanted to go for a stem cell,
exercise, right? Yeah. Everything. I mean, anything that is beneficial to your health is beneficial to your stem cells, including your gut stem cells, which are massively important in regenerating the gut lining. And there's so many things. I mean, these environmental toxins we talk about, they're screwing them up, right? But you talk about benefits, infrared, right? It's benefiting them. I mean, we just looked at data.
A huge list.
I mean, but like I said, pretty much anything that's improving your health is probably doing it at least in part through stem cells.
One thing that I was curious about that I never asked anybody is the impact of caloric restriction versus caloric excess on stem cells.
Yeah, I've never seen a study. But I mean, I could make all kinds of inferences what it probably would see, but I don't know for sure. So,
assuming calorie restriction may be better,
would be beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, because you're changing genetic expression in a lot of different ways with ketones. But again, most scientists aren't studying that because calories in, calories out, baby. It's all about calories,
bro.
So that's all they're thinking about. So because these scientists are trained that way, and trust me, I was trained that way. I didn't realize there was a difference between, good fats and bad fats and all this. And I'm fairly recent, PhD. It's not like I got mine in the 70s or something. I should have been taught this, but, it's so ingrained in the system and the textbooks that, as long as you've got
how'd you get so smart, man?
Number, self-taught stuff.
Reading everything.
You just have to work. Yeah. And that's it's too bad. But,
and 4 kids. You're a machine.
Oh, yeah.
You're a machine. All right, man. Tell me what's messed up about me. Oh, you got it all categorized too.
Well, so open your folder.
Oh, okay.
So normally I do this on Skype, and I email this to people, but here's your nifty little
Thank you very much.
So what I do is I usually start with detox genes.
Amazing.
Right? Because that's what I wrote my book on. That's what I'm obsessed with.
I need to know. And I have an idea of what my detox genes look like.
You had pretty good ones. I know you say your genes are bad.
That's good.
But your detox genes are pretty darn good.
Oh, that's great.
And I'll give you an example. So if you go to the last page on that first handout, so the overview here and what I do with my consulting clients, I used to just do pro athletes, by the way. Now I open it up to everybody because I see such a benefit for people with this.
So this one, the in general page?
One more page back. This one.
There you go.
What I do is the first half is usually about detox.
Got it.
And then the second half, anything else that comes up in my screen that might be related to sleep, longevity, muscles for you, right? I try to tailor what I'm looking for based on the person's needs. Yeah. Oh man, I learned a lot this morning, by the way. That was awesome.
Great.
So in terms of your detox genes, I listed the key ones here on this last page, and they're in gray highlight when you have a plus. Okay. And I'm using plus to signify you get a bad copy from your mother and a bad copy of that gene from your father.
Cursing them right now.
Well, you shouldn't be, because they're pretty good. Most people have like 10 detox gene issues. Okay. You had
4.
1, 2, 3, maybe you could say 4 because you had 2 on the COMT gene, right?
Yeah. So tell me about the COMT gene, because I knew that. I knew that double knockout.
Yep. And the first one, the V158M, just so you know and so your listeners know, that's, so you have this gene which makes a protein, right, called catechol O-methyltransferase in this case. Whatever they have these wacky names because we're wacky scientists. Mm-hmm. And the protein will be a certain length of amino acids, like 1,000 amino acids or whatever. But let's say position 158 is screwed up, which is what's going on in this case. Mm-hmm. Normally you'd have a V at position 158. Instead you have an M. That's the mutation, quote unquote. So V stands for valine, M stands for methionine. Okay. Those are amino acid abbreviations. So just like DNA has code, proteins, amino acids are, we have shorthand.
Okay.
So this particular plus causes a 40% reduction in COMT activity. It's pretty well established. It's well studied. So that's what I'm doing with page 4. You don't even need page 4 on this report I sent you. I just want you to see it and kind of get an overview and recognize you don't really have that many genes. The only other thing before we dive into COMT is that you see your vitamin D receptor gene, VDR, this one.
Yep.
And then you see CYP1B1, this one.
Yep.
You have multiple spots on that gene, 432, 453, right? You have multiple positions that are plus minus, meaning you got a bad copy from one parent and a good copy from one parent. And that's iffy, right? As a scientist, it's hard to say, if you have a plus minus gene, a bad copy and a good copy we have 2 copies in every cell in our body.
Right, you don't know how it's going to express.
Yeah, you don't know exactly how it's going to manifest.
So these are vitamin D and the VDR?
I'll get to them. I'll get to them. But I just want you to know that if you've got multiple plus minuses on the same gene, then it usually does cause a health impact. If it's just one spot that has a plus minus, it's pretty iffy in terms of...
So the CYP gene's got many spots.
You have 3 spots on yours. So to me, that usually indicates that's an estrogen metabolism gene. So it usually indicates you have less, estrogen stays in your body longer. So like aromatase inhibitors, things like that would be more important for you because you don't want testosterone converting into estrogen. You don't want these artificial estrogens we talk about. But again, it's plus minuses. So it's harder for me as a scientist to say, here's a really tangible thing. But people with plus CYP1B1s, almost always, I consult with a ton of people, they always have estrogenic issues, like the man boobs when they get fat, they store a lot more fat. You go down the list of like what estrogen symptoms look like, they get them, and that's one of my favorite genes to look at because I wrote a book on estrogen. And, and I send people my book for free when they've got a plus in that gene because I really want them to improve their health. And I want them to at least see the top 10 list that I have and say, look, you got to at least avoid the big ones,
Right.
But that's page 4. So again, you don't need page 4, but let's go back to page 2 on that handout. And that's where I give you actionable ideas on what you can do for your gene. So let's start with the COMT, right? So I start off by saying, here's what I found based on my analysis of these genes. Based on your specific plus COMT, again, that stands for catechol O-methyltransferase. I recommend eating more salt and drinking more water than the average person for you.
Oh yeah, I already do it.
Yeah, and the reason for that is because catecholamines aren't being broken down as well in your body, and that signals your kidney to excrete
it's the Hulk smash gene, right?
What's that?
Hulk smash gene. When I get stressed out, I stay stressed out. Is that what the cat?
Yeah. Well, adrenaline stays in your body longer too. So, which I find this one frequently in athletes because you get a little bit more pump when you're adrenalized. You get addicted to adrenaline a little bit easier. It's fine.
No.
And sometimes that inhibits sleep. So if you work out too late in the evening, it's gonna disrupt your sleep, especially if you're tracking it with like an Oura ring.
That's why I've got the blue blockers on, man. This makes such a difference for me.
Yeah.
If I block my blue, especially at night,
interesting,
I sleep like a champ. If I don't, I don't sleep poorly, but I don't sleep well. Like it's not deep.
Yeah. So that's real simple, right? I mean, it sounds like a problem. We got plus genes, dysfunctional genes, but really a lot of it helps people in terms. Have you heard of the book, The Salt Fix?
Yes.
Really interesting guy. I think he was on the British Journal of Medicine as an editor and all of this, like a good scientist. And he's got all kinds of interesting physiology, and he's done research on salt and how important it is just for general muscle function and optimization. So for you, it's super important. And I recommend magnesium supplementing in the evenings for you to help kind of suppress this maybe hyper-responsive system that you might have, right? And you probably already do that.
I do.
But it'll
now,
help
is methylation something that I would want to look at for supporting CompT, or does that not influence CompT at all?
Yeah, no, that's important, yeah. And magnesium will help with methylation just because it's involved in these enzymes. But yeah, I mean, you can translate this in a lot of different ways. But I think the biggest thing is the salt and water, because you're getting that out of your body quicker than the average Joe. And I also think people way overemphasize this idea that we need to hydrate, we need to overhydrate, drink water all the time. I think that's over-exaggerated. But if your genetics are such that you've got an issue in this gene, I think that is important, right? So this is a perfect example of.
So how is it just a matter of like more excretion, or is it a matter of actually I'm going to excrete more salt and water because of this CompT gene?
Yeah.
I'm going to do both. So like meaning, will this CompT double positive increase my
sodium excretion?
Yes.
Presumably, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it's a perfect example of how you can't generalize in the dietary industry, right? Because if I was just telling everybody to drink more salt or eat more salt and drink more water, probably wouldn't be a great recommend. But if I looked at your genetics specifically and said, well, yeah, you need it, but then I might look at Drew's genetics or whatever, right? Derek's genetics, and he might not have that. And then it'd probably be overkill. You'd just be unnecessarily increasing urinary output and whatever, maybe stressing your body out in a certain way. But for you, that's important. The next one's vitamin D. You had a couple plus genes in your vitamin D receptor. You know what? I have a paragraph here on an additional paragraph just stating that if you have high D levels and high estrogen, it'll further inhibit your COMT gene.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I can't get too high with my vitamin D.
Correct.
Got it.
Or if you do, at least make sure your salt is high, your water is high, that sort of thing. But yeah. But what's tricky in your case is you had some vitamin D receptor issues, and we'll get to those. But just keep that in the back of your mind for now.
So just keep my estrogen in check.
Estrogen's the biggest one, yeah. And then your MAOA gene, monoamine oxidase. This one, MAOA is real similar to COMT in terms of the breakdown products and the pathways. But this one is more specific to tyramine-containing foods. They usually decrease the function of this enzyme. So you want to be more careful than normal about fermented foods and cured foods and aged foods. Now, most people, those are super healthy. But for you, you might either not notice the benefit, or you might feel an adverse effect from fermented food type stuff.
Meaning it will give me an increased adrenaline or increased likelihood of keeping adrenaline elevated?
It could, or it's just going to throw off your physiology in general with your salt and your water and your catecholamines. And just my experience too, I'm always trying to figure out practically, okay, if you're eating fermented foods and this person's eating fermented, you might have an issue, but then this person might have just great benefits. And it's like, well, what's the difference, right? And it's not always genetic.
Yeah. I don't eat any cured aged foods, any processed meats, any fava beans, and I drink profuse amounts of beer, but only on days ending in Y. So man, excellent. Great information.
And then the next one and the last one is your CYP2D6. You had a plus in that one. That gene is a liver enzyme, right? Humans have 2,000 enzymes in our liver called CYP, cytochrome P450 genes, that are involved in detoxing, so breaking down chemicals. This particular one is involved in prescription drug breakdown. Literally about 25% of prescription drugs are broken down by this gene.
Okay.
And when drug companies go through the process of FDA approval, they look at which CYP enzyme breaks their drug down, because it's important for them to know, like, how long is it going to stay in your body. And so this is well-studied stuff, thankfully. And so obviously 25% of drugs is a huge list. I'm not going to list that, but you can easily go to Wikipedia or something and say CYP2D6 drug list or something, and it'll show all the drugs. And then if you get a prescription, you just want to look down the list and say, yeah, this drug might stay. This one will probably stay in my body a lot longer. How long exactly? Not super well known, right? All these aren't super well characterized, but you want to have your radar up high for adverse effects. So you want to look at the adverse effects of that prescription drug and say, yeah, I'm probably more susceptible to getting those. I mean,
good to know, man.
You're probably not on prescription drugs, but just if you ever were,
well, at some point there may have been some anabolic influences in my life. So
yeah,
the likelihood of that influencing my liver toxicity would be high, right?
Yeah, and sometimes it's a benefit to have higher levels of whatever, but in this case, you just want to be aware. So next page, that's pretty easy. Like I said, man, your detox genes, they're pretty clean.
That's great.
So it doesn't give me as much to talk about. We have plenty of other stuff on that random genes. So at the top of this page, this is plus minus genes.
Okay.
And you'll see I say that they have, in general, plus minus means you're not going to see as much of a health impact. But if you've got multiple plus minus on the same gene, then I personally do see health impacts consistently with people. Varies a lot, so it's hard to put a number on it, but it's worth noting. So based on your specific gene, vitamin D receptor, and that's a little typo, I should have plus minus, right? It's my bad there, I'm traveling. Right, you had multiple plus minuses on that gene. I recommend higher than normal D. So sun is really important for you specifically. Up to 10,000 IU, somewhere in that range. Honestly, you probably have a good sense because you're a biohacker. I mean, do you know your levels? Usually I ask people for their blood work if they have it.
I was in the high 60s, I think.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So you're good here because your receptor is just not taking it up as much. So that includes your gut receptor, and that includes the receptors in your cells throughout your body. So as vitamin D is cruising around your blood, those receptors aren't going to stick as tightly to it, and they're just not going to take as much up. So you're not utilizing it as much, but above 50, I think, is good.
So probably, so there's different schools of thought with supplementing with vitamin D. Some people say a high bolus dose less frequently, and some people say a lower amount more frequently.
Consistently.
So for me, it probably makes more sense to do more consistent low dosing because I'm not going to have that higher amount of uptake.
Yeah,
so I want to kind of subject it more often to things.
Yeah, smart. And I often talk to people about, these studies because there's a lot of people arguing that high levels are just completely superfluous and unnecessary. But if the native tribes around the equator are around 100, which they are, nanograms per deciliter, and as the average American is around 30, that's a huge discrepancy, right? And I think it's better to be closer to what the native indigenous people are that are just living outdoors and active.
Yeah.
And they're not supplementing anything. So I think if you're going to err, I kind of call it the paleo principle. It's like err on the side of what our ancestors were doing. And yeah, sometimes that's debatable on what our ancestors were doing, but try and decipher that as much as you can and try and err on that side rather than the American side. And just as a side note, because it's an interesting story and because you're not paying per hour, which people, I don't want to tell stories when I'm doing DNA consulting generally, but I know a guy at Boston University who's he's a vitamin D expert. I did my PhD there at the med school, and that's where he is at the medical school at Boston U. And he got fired from BU, and then they had to rehire him. They had to go through this legal process and basically legally get back on Boston University, force them to rehire him because it was kind of I don't want to get into that detail, but basically he's a vitamin D expert, and he's the guy who basically has just really pioneered this idea that standard American vitamin D is terrible compared to where it should be, and the recommended daily values are way below what they should be. He's the guy, and he does consulting for zoos because they have a lot of infertility in the zoos, and they've always blamed it on animals in captivity, like, oh, the panda bears are infertile because they're not, they're in captivity, and that's just what happens. No, so he discovered that their vitamin D is crazy low because they're behind glass and they're not getting sunshine. So even bears that have a lot of fur, they need sunshine hitting their skin to convert that cholesterol to vitamin D.
Wow.
And And of course, they're probably on some silly low cholesterol diet too in the zoo, but whatever.
High grains, right?
So
soy and grains.
So he goes around and gets paid big money to consult, and all he does for the most part is just give them vitamin D, and boom, the fertility comes back. Like Komodo dragons suddenly start having babies, and it's awesome. But it shows you the power of vitamin D, right?
And interesting. And you wonder how. I always go down the path of wondering with all these extinctions happening, like how much that has to do with the estrogenification.
Estrogen is the biggest one. Yeah, I think so too. Right? I mean, they found it in alligator urine here in Florida. It's just everywhere. Every time you look close enough, it's there at the nanogram levels at least, and those are the levels that are active with your hormones. But crazy. Yeah. MTHFR. So that one. Let me just go back to page 4 here. You didn't. So you had, and jump back to page 4 yourself too, if you don't mind. You see the MTHFR. You have the plus minus on C677T. This particular genetic variant is a really nasty one. If you had a plus, I actually have a plus on this one, and it basically alters your body's ability to convert folic acid into methylfolates, right? So folic acid used to be patented. It's a fake chemistry compound made in labs. And I'm kind of working on a book on this too, even though it's kind of such a side project because I have so many priorities. Mm-hmm. But it's such an interesting story. And personally, I've seen so much impact in me and my own health with this one. And I've helped people. I find almost every time you get a miscarriage, they've got this issue. Super, super high association in my experience consulting. And I do a lot of this. I do this every day. And when I say this issue, I mean plus, MTHFR, C677T. This is the nasty one. For a plus minus, they've done a ton of studies on it, and they show that you're, like for you as a plus minus, you're 35% less efficient in processing folic acid. What I mean by that is you're not converting it to methylfolate. You want to avoid folic acid. It's fake. Eat spinach. They have folates in spinach, methylfolate. Mm-hmm. Eat raspberries. They have methylfolate in that stuff. And that's one of the problems with multivitamins is they've got folic acid almost across the board, except good ones like Vinnie Torridge makes a good one. There's people out there now that are making good ones with folate. But the ones with folic acid are actually causing problems because let's say your receptor is not working, right? Or you're not converting it, not the receptor, but the enzyme's not working. So you're not converting folic acid into methylfolate. Now, let's say you take a bunch of folic acid, which some doctors will tell you to do. They find this gene problem and you're having trouble with fertility. So they say, take tons of folic acid. What that does is it clogs the system. It actually sticks to the receptors, and then it's not getting downstream because you're not processing it. Right. And so you're not even converting it to methylfolate, so you can't use it. And the reason that's so important for miscarriages, you don't make DNA out of thin air. You make it out of folic acid, methylfolate, right? You don't even make it out of folic acid, which is kind of a misnomer that it's a vitamin. It's methylfolate, right? So you're not making DNA. If you've got a fetus dividing like crazy rapid, they're obviously in need. They're in a high demand situation for DNA. If you don't let them make DNA because you don't have methylfolate, you just got a bunch of folic acid gumming up the system. So even if you're eating the spinach and the raspberries, it's not even getting in there because the folic acid is gumming it up. Oh, wow. Then you find the miscarriages and the struggles for fertility. On top of that, you throw the estrogens in and all this stuff we talk about, and boom, big problem. But if you had a plus for this, you'd be 70+% less efficient in processing folic acid. Super well defined, super well characterized, thankfully. So avoid folic acid.
Excellent information. Thank you.
And the paragraph here kind of just mentions some of that stuff, how you probably want to take folates or at least eat them. Mm-hmm. I like to err on the side of eating things instead of supplementing them when you can. But it's always good to have the methylfolates around, for supplementing. And
I want the grains that are rich with folic acid. Right?
Yeah. And what the crazy thing is, what got me going on the book was my dad's got this one, and he's had massive health issues from this because as soon as he switched over, he had massive benefits, just like me. And then since 1998, the U.S. government mandates that they put folic acid into wheat products, into a lot of these grains. And so they're literally forcing it in the system because they think it's preventing miscarriages, or issues. And then it's actually causing more problems in people like us with the folic acid issue. And not a lot of people have the 677T, But most people I consult for have issues with their MTHFR gene. You know, there's the 1298. There's different versions of issues.
So the best solution is just supplementing with methylated folate.
Yeah. Or eating greens, right? But again, you have to avoid folic acid. That's even more important. And then the other thing that's interesting about MTHFR is it's involved in heavy metal detox, getting heavy metals out. So cooking on aluminum foil would be not ideal for you. That stuff bioaccumulates in your brain, you know, titanium, all these heavy metals, you're probably more sensitive to them.
I agree.
So that's pretty simple, at least in terms of practicality. And then your BHMT gene, you had a couple of plus minuses on that one, right? So overall, you know, you didn't have that many plus genes in your detox genes, but you had a bunch of plus minuses, right? So you had multiple BHMT genes. Mm-hmm. And this one stands for betaine homocysteine methyltransferase. So it's involved in processing homocysteine. So usually people with gene issues here, they have higher than normal homocysteine, which is kind of used as a marker for inflammation and other things. So it's something you should watch for in your blood. And if you do happen to have it, it usually helps if you get a lot of B6, that'll lower it down. Okay. And it's important that you get meats because meats, you know, have a lot of these Bs, especially B6. And so some people genetically, they're pretty good for vegetarian, vegan. I'd say you're not, because it's better to get the sources, the B vitamins, especially B6 from the meats themselves. You don't have the vegan gene. And most people don't, but I have consulted for vegans that actually genetically can handle it, which is rare. I mean,
so how much do you consider blood type? So, you know, there's these people who have the blood type mentality, right?
Yeah.
You don't?
No, I don't. But
is there any way to look at how DNA is influencing someone's blood type?
Like, I can tell you your blood type just based on your DNA.
Oh, can you?
Yeah, to some degree. I
don't know my blood type.
I didn't look.
Yeah, okay.
I just figured, no, it's not that important to me.
Yeah, because
it could be. I haven't studied it. I'm open
about,
to the idea.
Yeah, there's all people talking about, well, if you're this blood type, you should be this way. So I think my blood type is a vegetarian.
A vegetarian?
That's what they suggest I be.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the problem with that is it would be short-sighted too, because you could have XYZ blood type, but then have a bunch of genes that are involved in processing these B vitamins, and then, you know, making meat way more important.
Yeah.
Or less important, you know. So, and pistachios, by the way, are also real good for B6.
Okay, good to know.
And what's interesting here is zinc helps this enzyme function. It's a zinc-dependent process. So I say make sure you get zinc, you know, and we'll come back to that later in others. So keep that in mind.
Okay.
And then finally, the last one on here is your CYP1B1. And again, I have a typo because it should say plus minus. I don't normally have those typos, but these ones
it's auto-correcting.
Yeah, and CYP1B1, it's involved in estrogen clearance and some smoke, like smoke compounds. So you're probably more sensitive to like smokes and stuff. Like,
shouldn't be smoking.
Yeah, you shouldn't be smoking.
Cigarettes. You gotta give it up.
But it's funny how many people, if they have a plus, especially in this, they really are disgusted by smoke. Like cigarettes, it just like appalled them.
I get nauseous as soon as I smell it.
Yeah, and that's what's going on. It's usually your body is telling you.
Now,
that
cigar
you can't
smoke for some
process
reason I have an emotional attachment to.
Oh yeah,
my grandfather smoked cigars, and I can deal with it. But
did I ever tell you I grow my own tobacco?
No.
Yeah, so I grow my own and I roll my own cigars.
Wow.
So I used to smoke a pipe here when I lived in Florida, and I grow Black Mammoth in this variety called Havana, like a lighter variety, and then you can mix and match.
Were you smoking your own cigar last night?
No. I was down in
You didn't bring it with you?
Ybor City.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't have any more of my own, or I would have probably brought them for you. But because that's when I smoke my own, I smoke them socially with other people that want to taste like homemade smoked cigars.
Yeah. How different is it than a commercial one?
It's great. It's awesome. Yeah. But the rolling process is an art. So mine always look lumpy and they look kind of like a turd or something. It doesn't look as good. Hey, man, but you know, that's why I was down in Ybor City in Tampa here, because it's like the cigar capital of this area for sure. Yeah. And I was learning some tricks yesterday.
Very cool. Were they teaching you how to roll?
Oh, for sure. They just do it right there. So I mean, I know, but it's mostly just a feel and an art thing. So learning it's more doing.
Very cool.
But yeah, it's fun. And I think a lot of the smoking stuff, you know, they're putting so many chemicals in there. It's like, is it the chemicals? Is it the tobacco?
Right.
Are you inhaling it into your lungs? Or are you just puffing it out like a cigar? There's a lot of that, you know. These medical doctors are rightly concerned about smoking, but it gets exaggerated when you're talking about organic, homegrown tobacco or good, you know, good products that you're not breathing into your lungs.
Right.
Which I'm okay with, as you know, but I'm okay if you don't want to smoke also, including cigars. But the smoke gene, right? So that's you're a perfect example of somebody, you get nauseous.
Yeah.
That's usually what I see some visible manifestation of having this.
I don't feel like a crybaby anymore when I leave places where people are smoking.
Yeah, and estrogen stays in your body longer because of this gene. Now again, you're not plus, so it's not usually as obvious, as dramatic, but you had a bunch of plus minuses on this gene. So the phthalates, all the ones that I talk about in my book, the red dyes, the lavender, that's stuff you want to avoid more than the average person, because, you know, those are estrogenic. And they're staying in your body longer. So in other words, they'll have more of an impact.
Yeah. It's funny that I think somewhere unconsciously I know all these things, right? Because these are all things literally, like if I were to tell you my daily routine,
well,
every
that's
one of
because
these things is on there.
You're super dialed in, right?
Yeah.
Most people aren't even close to as dialed in as you are.
The only one that I can't honestly say that I do daily is vitamin B6 intentionally, but I do everything else.
Right?
Oh yeah, for
every
sure.
day?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so you don't need the vitamin B's by themselves, probably.
But literally, including all the way down to the methylfolate, vitamin D, magnesium, zinc, all these things, and supporting estrogen detoxification. Yep. Interesting how that works, man.
Yeah, it's
Figured
cool.
it out.
Well, let's talk about extra genes. So that's the first part. But then, you know, so I have this panel of detox genes that I like to look at, and they're involved in various ways of detoxing.
Is that in here as well? Or you got it?
Yeah, I've got my own page, and that's on this side of the folder.
Got it.
And what I do for you is I give you this Excel sheet, and I printed it, but normally I would just email this. And I number these. And so if you want to take notes, rather than having you write down all these references and all this complicated stuff, you can just take a little note if you wanted to research these genes later on your own. This gives you that opportunity. Right? And so this is just for listeners. This is 1 through 35 on an Excel sheet, right? And all these reference SNPs. RS means reference SNP. And sometimes you'll see the GS, that means a group of SNPs. So not just one, but there's a whole group associated with health issues. And these are, again, super well studied. And I don't have like a really nice piece of paper I can give you that just has it all on there, because there's thousands. Like I said, 23andMe does 600,000 SNPs, right? So I've never had the time to sit down and write up a little thing for all 600,000 of these genes. So what I do is I vary it. You know, I just write my own notes based on your DNA.
What was RS again?
RS is reference SNP. That's what it stands for. So scientists use that as kind of a way of researching these genes without listing all these goofy names that we've made up over the years. Right. And I can tell you the names, right? So like the first one is the gene called PER1, and that's period circadian rhythm gene, PER1, and it has to do with sleep. So I figure we'll start with sleep. Yeah. Right? Because I emailed you about, or texted you last night about sleep, because I knew you were an early riser. And so what I'm going to do just as an overview for you is we're going to talk about sleep, then muscles and training, because I figure that's important, diet, mental, longevity, stress genes, and then some drug-related genes. A few more random detox genes that came up, and disease genes, stuff like that. But that's the overview. Okay. So starting with sleep, you had 3 genes that I found that were worth noting. This first one, period circadian rhythm gene, it's a plus, and you see the letters, that indicates plus, that you're an early riser. So you genetically, people with this gene, they wake up an hour earlier than the average person.
True story.
Yeah. But then you had a plus minus gene, number 2, that indicates you're slightly more prefer to stay up late, which is period circadian 3 gene, so PER3. But you're probably a flexible sleeper more than the average person. Sure. But because you're a plus in the morning gene, I think you're a morning person based on your genetics. You might have overridden that. A lot of people, they're actually night owls based on their genetics, but then they override it through discipline and they say, no, I get up at 5. Well, did you struggle at first to get into that habit? Yeah, for sure. So you're genetically disposed one way. You can fight it. You can use discipline, and that's awesome. But it's kind of good to know the genetics, I think, you know, and your tendencies. The third gene on there, you actually have a twofold risk of developing restless leg syndrome. And the gene there is MEIS1. And again, you can look up the reference SNP too, but it's a ++. And I don't honestly have a lot of practical ideas on how to fix that. Usually magnesium helps. Have you ever struggled with restless leg? Good. It's probably because you've got good vascularity, you've been working out, you're in shape. Those are all the kinds of things I would normally recommend if you've struggled with it. But this gene, there's not a really clear light at the end of the tunnel where I can say, this is definitely what you should do. This will probably nail it on the head. But at least I want you to know you've got it.
Got it. So there's a pharmaceutical that may or may not be used in bodybuilding called quinine sulfate. And that's the only medical indication in the U.S. for quinine, and it's just used for cramping. Yeah. So when bodybuilders compete, cramping is a big thing.
So is that used in malaria treatment too?
It is.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it's used for.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
So when
you just drink some tonic, gin and tonic, it's got some of that.
Maybe. Yeah. So I may or may not have had a previous restless leg prescription in my life.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and there might be excellent, strategies for preventing or improving restless leg if you had it. And that's where sometimes, I don't know everything. I can dig in and find a lot of interesting stuff, but you can too in a lot of ways. And if you did develop restless leg, I'd say go to that gene, look it up and look at all the research. And that's the beauty of doing DNA, I think too, is it's not going to change. Your DNA is what it is.
If I want to train,
so later,
I'm good. If I take weeks off, it's a different thing.
Yeah, you're probably twitching all over the place.
Yeah. Well, I notice it only when I fly. Like sitting on an airplane for 17 hours.
Do you wear a compression?
No, I don't. But I just notice if I'm training properly, I chill, man. If I'm not training, I get a little restless.
Oh yeah. I think that's true of everybody. But I use the compression socks sometimes. Yeah. Not that I'm a marathon guy, but if I was, I would wear them after that too as a recovery.
Sure.
In certain situations, but flying also. But let's talk training, man, because you have some cool genes with training. And we'll start. So number 4 is kind of where that's at, where that starts. Yeah. And then you have a ++. The first gene we're going to talk about is nitric oxide, NOS3, nitric oxide synthase 3. It's an endothelial nitric oxide, meaning your blood vessels, your skin secrete nitric oxide. It changes the way your blood vessels function. So this one is usually found in power athletes. So it's kind of a rare gene to have a ++. You've got it, which is awesome.
This is the 4, number 4.
It's number 4. Okay. Yep. And what people with issues in this gene, usually it helps if they have infrared, even more so. So they see more benefits with infrared because infrared stimulates nitric oxide release, right? So that's kind of an interesting connection with this gene. Just not because that's my goal, right? I'm always trying to figure out, okay, practically.
Where's the application?
Yeah. And for you, that's how that's probably related. Because you said do you feel the difference? You don't get paresthesia like I do. Because you probably because you're already secreting nitric oxide, your blood flow is probably more of a VEGF type of a stimulation, which we looked at that data earlier, vascular endothelial growth factor VEGF, instead of nitric oxide, which
would be because that paresthesia. Yeah, I'll pay attention now if I notice it.
You probably, you'd have noticed it, right?
I noticed it in the sauna.
Oh yeah, interesting. Yeah, maybe if the blood vessels are out and if you put that sucker right up next to your skin, you might get it. Yeah. It's weird, man. It makes me kind of creep out, like beta-alanine supplements. You're a mix of muscle types, number 5, based on your alpha-actinin gene. It's a pretty accurate representation of your overall muscle types, usually. A lot of sprinters would be a ++. You're ± here. Yeah. So not a super benefit for growing huge muscles. Usually the power guys, they're ++. So you've obviously worked an uphill battle a little bit in this regard. But then the next gene, which is number 6 there, is this angiotensin gene, a blood pressure regulation gene, it indicates you're more of an endurance. You're plus for endurance. So you had a really interesting mix of endurance, power, nitric oxide, so it's a total mix for you, which is fine, which is probably a good mix for bodybuilding because you do a lot of high rep, 10 plus reps.
So blood pressure, what does it indicate for blood pressure that I would normally have? It just healthy
regulates
blood pressure,
your blood pressure. Yeah. This one's not usually involved. In terms of studies, you don't find high blood pressure, low blood, but at least with this gene.
Got it.
And I do look at other genes for blood pressure, especially for you because I'm recommending you eat more salt. So I check salt-related blood pressure genes, and you didn't have any of those.
I typically have low blood pressure all through my life.
Yeah, even if you had tons of salt, you would be fine. In my
like for me, 120
experience.
Over 80 is high.
Yeah,
like I said, the highest I've ever.
Well, and weightlifting helps too because you're spiking it, but then your body brings it below what it was before you lifted. Now here's the creatinine clearance gene number 7. I can't remember if we were talking about this. Maybe I think I was talking about this with Danny actually, because we were looking at his DNA this morning just on an app. But you have good creatinine clearance, healthy kidney function, plus minus, but it's tending to be a good gene, right? So plus doesn't always mean bad. It might mean a weird variation that gives you higher muscle strength or higher kidney secretion of creatinine.
So if I had plus there, it would be extremely good kidney health.
Yeah,
got it.
Yeah, at least in this case, right? And that's a great thing because that means you can hammer the protein compared to most people, and it's not going to be quite as taxing on your kidneys.
Good to know.
Yeah,
as a bodybuilder, transparently, that's always my greatest concern, right? Is there other kidney genes that we can look at?
Yeah, and they would have come up on my screen if you had any issues. You didn't, and that's what because there's so many genes and so many studies, I don't even look for them if they're just average, but if they're significant in a good way or substantial in a bad way, especially in a bad way, I usually tell people, and I look for the genes that have a 2-fold increased risk or more. Now, if you get a Prometheus or whatever other genetic report, there's thousands of genes that come up, right? You can have a 50-page report, right? Because they list every gene that has like a 1.5-fold increased risk or 1.2-fold. Right. The problem with those is when you repeat that study, you almost always find the difference dissolves away because those differences are so small. So I don't care about it. But if it's 2-fold, usually those are studies you can repeat, you can replicate them, and they're substantial. So that's the ones I try and tell you, right, to try and improve your health. So number 8 on there, stronger bones. So you had a plus, 2 Wnt genes for stronger bones genetically. So you got awesome bones.
Never broken a bone.
Not surprised, yeah. That's most people with stronger, especially because you have 2 of them. That's 8 and 9. Now pecs, we were talking about this morning. You have genes 10 and 11 for bigger pecs.
Booyah.
Yeah, and that's great. And
both 10 and 11 are big pecs?
Yep.
Oh, wow.
So you had a plus and then a plus minus for that.
Huh.
And like I said this morning, calves, you've got giant calves and you're known for that.
People may want to start studying my genes to find out which calves.
Which calf genes are. But because nobody's done that study, I can't communicate one, but
it's interesting that it would also indicate a female's big breasts.
Yeah.
I don't get how those would be correlated because one's a muscle and one's
fat tissue related. Yeah. I don't know, honestly. It might be collagen production. It's probably muscle related too.
Interesting.
But I could look into that question. Cool. It's a great question. But some of these aren't within the genes. Some of these SNPs are outside of genes, right? And I think these are a perfect example of that. So the genes make proteins, right? They're the regions within your DNA that get transcribed and then translated into a protein. But there's obviously plenty of other areas in your DNA that aren't transcribed. They used to just call them junk, your junk DNA. Right. But now we know it's really important for regulating things. And these breast genes, these pec genes, they're in that region that's not even associated with the gene. So we don't understand how it works, to be honest. Otherwise, I would have written it on my notes here. Like if you do research on it, it won't say, this is the gene that you've got for that. It'll just say it's within this chromosome region. And what that means is it's it's just on a random area that we used to consider junk. Now we found, oh my gosh, it's important for pec development.
So I don't have the bicep gene, I guess.
Well, you don't have any negative bicep genes. But yeah, the pec gene helps. And I like to try and identify people's strengths so they know genetically you may have a strength in this way. And then weaknesses, you may need to really work on that area to really bring out.
I'd love to know how they define, like what advantage that would give you, like as far as your ability to build pecs. Like what's the mechanism, you know? Great, I have this gene. What
usually happens is, again, it's on a junk region of DNA. It's on a random region that's not even associated with the gene. So what happens is DNA folds around these histones. So it's all folded up. And so the region that you've got a mutation on or a variant is a region that proteins bind to. And that, because it's folded, that's close in proximity with the gene. And that interacts with the gene expression, like a gene. Right. We don't know which gene. Right. That's the problem. It's hard to... So when you uncurl that DNA, you unfold it, and then you sequence it. Yeah, you know the code, but you didn't know how it was folded and which part of the DNA was next to a different part because it's all tangled up with itself. So what's happening is it's close to a gene. So I can speculate maybe it's collagen, maybe, you know, like between the cells that's more, I don't know.
Right.
That's
but why pecs and not everything else? Like why is that, why is that only going to...
Oh, because different tissues in your body have different genes that are expressed, right? So, in your brain, right, you express leptin receptors, right? But then in your heart, you don't, or your kidneys, you don't, or your liver, you don't.
But muscle tissue, you would suspect, would be relatively similar.
Well, so every different tissue, the overall point is that every tissue expresses different genes. So they all have the same. If I took a piece of your brain and sequenced the DNA code, it would be the exact same as if I sequenced your muscle, right?
Yep.
But if you took that DNA and let it make proteins, right? That you took that blueprint and let it build houses, the house would be totally different from your muscle compared to your brain.
Sure.
And how that happens starts at the embryonic stage, and it's really complicated.
I watched a movie on Netflix about that. It was very interesting.
Yeah, and these Wnt genes I was just mentioning, involved in your bone strength, they're super important for just overall development, the Wnts, the WNT. I used to study Wnts in relation to Alzheimer's when I was doing Alzheimer's research for a couple of years. I went to a Wnt conference in Georgetown in DC, literally a whole conference just on Wnt.
Wow.
And I presented data on Wnt's involvements in Alzheimer's and amyloid beta secretion, plaque formation in the brain.
So is that gene with my strong bones influencing my amyloid plaques?
No. Okay. Because it's not in the bone. Like the Wnt16 is bone specific.
Got it.
So it's not in the brain. But what our hypothesis was, or what we were kind of thinking, was that with Alzheimer's potentially there's this regression in development towards, so as a child, right, you're developing super fast with these Wnt genes all activated and all this. And then as you get older, the Wnt genes start to change. And maybe that regression is related to Alzheimer's development. We want to understand how it develops. Right? We know Alzheimer's is plaques in your brain, right? Tau plaques and amyloid plaques. But how does that happen? We don't know. And so that's why we were looking at that. Like maybe it's a regression back to childhood where you don't remember, your memory just starts to slide away based on these development genes that are hyperstimulated or something. Like I said, it was speculative. We were just researching it.
Very interesting.
Let's see, pecs we talked about. So pain sensitivity, number 12. I always look at this group of SNPs, this group of variants involved in pain, because if you are hypersensitive to pain, like you're a wimp, right? You want to know that genetically and basically push yourself harder and just say, okay, I'm feeling pain, but I'm being a wimp. I want to get past it. But if you're the opposite spectrum, right? You don't feel pain as well as normal. Well, then you might hurt yourself because you're over pushing yourself. Yeah.
My daughter's got. I would love to see her DNA.
Well, so you fall in the middle, right? So you have normal pain sensitivity.
Right.
So
I guarantee my daughter's got
high.
Oh, it's crazy.
High tolerance.
She literally rips her face open and doesn't even flinch.
Wow.
Yeah, she's.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
She probably got it from your wife.
She's a beast. Yeah, totally not from me, right?
So that's good. I mean, I figure normal pain sensitivity is important to know, but
sure.
Diet. So that's your training genes. Not, nothing like crazy, but a mixed power, endurance. So I think genetically, if you have all kinds of power genes, that would be probably more optimal for bodybuilding, So you've had to struggle a little bit more to build some of those muscles because you've got that endurance gene tendency. You've got some of the estrogen genes.
I think I would have been a great marathon runner.
Yeah.
Kidding aside, I've actually thought about doing like track racing because I'm like, I got these legs that I've built up, got so much power output, and I've got this great endurance. Like my VO2 max, my lung capacity is superior to most people.
Yeah, and you're burning fat probably, which is key.
Yeah.
Now, so let's move to diet though. Number 13, plus minus for higher sugar consumption. So just it's a CL or SLCA. It's a solute gene. It's a gene involved in taste reception. So you just like sugar more than the average person genetically. It's plus minus, so not super, not super different. But it's probably worth noting that you might have to struggle. It might be more of a struggle for you to avoid sugar. Some people have no predilection to like sugar. Avoiding sugar is easy for some people. For you, it's plus minus and mid range, but probably a little bit more of a struggle. You did have a couple increased diabetes risks genes.
Which ones are those?
Number 14 is the first one. And the next one is probably similar. Plus.
Diabetes runs everywhere in my family.
Yeah, and that's a zinc transporter protein. So honestly,
increased zinc.
Yeah, it goes back to the taking zinc, right? I said I was going to refer to that earlier.
Yeah.
Really important that you have zinc, 100%.
Great.
Because you want that transporter clearing glucose. Your insulin sensitivity should improve. If you were deficient in zinc, you're probably going to really struggle with insulin compared to most people. I'm speculating, but it's pretty consistent. Like it's the kind of thing that it's pretty predictable.
Excellent.
And then the number 15 is again related to obesity and type 2 diabetes. It's the FTO gene. Rhonda Patrick loves this gene. It's a fatty acid. It's a gene that's involved in browning fat. So you've got white fat and you've got brown fat. Brown fat is brown in color because it's loaded with mitochondria, so it burns a ton of energy. And instead of creating ATP to burn energy, it's just creating heat and just pumping the protons out. So it burns all this energy, creates a bunch of heat. It's just like revving an engine. You're not actually you're pushing the brake, but you're revving the engine. So you create a bunch of heat, but you're not actually going anywhere.
Right.
That's what brown fat does.
Like Danny standing there in a pool of water this morning.
Yeah.
Standing there doing nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
So this gene is involved in your white cells becoming brown. So white fat cells can actually turn into beige fat and then turn brown. They can go in that direction, which of course means they're metabolically healthier, but you don't do that as well. So how to optimize that? I don't know.
Exercise. Don't eat as much.
Yeah. But it's good to know that you've got the gene. Rhonda Patrick, I think, says that you're not as good at metabolizing fat because of this gene, but that's not what I see in my experience.
Right.
That's the only thing.
Interesting.
So I disagree with her on this one. Usually I agree with her.
Yeah.
But at least in this one, I think I don't see that with people. But you do see the obesity risk.
Yeah, interesting.
And then the dairy sensitivity gene is the group of SNPs there, number 16 on your list. So that indicates you're dairy sensitive to me.
Yeah.
Really predictable.
True story.
People say you can't genetically determine that. This is what I see. And so you want to avoid dairy, Usually it's either casein or lactose, and you can use strategies to figure out which one it is.
Both.
But yeah, it's usually it's one or the other or both. Then number 17 is a FOXO3 gene that you have that's not optimal. It's plus 17 and 18 are both FOXO3 genes. FOXO3 is involved in glucose metabolism. So the studies show that people with these genes, they're 3 to 5-fold less likely to live to 100. So it's kind of an aging gene. And the only reason it's an aging gene is because you're not burning sugar as well. So most people in these studies are eating a ton of sugar. So for you don't want to do that, or it's going to decrease your longevity.
Great.
So sugar for you is going to be detrimental, even though you're attracted to it with your taste buds, right? With number 13.
Yeah, I don't eat it.
And then finally with the diet, number 19 there on your list, plus for a 2-fold increased risk for Crohn's disease. Huh. And I don't think you've got Crohn's. I don't think you have to worry too much at this stage. But what that usually tells me, and that's an autophagy gene, by the way. So fasting is going to be really beneficial for you more so than most people. Autophagy is cellular eating, and it's an efficient way for your cells to recycle proteins rather than just making new things from scratch. But it tells me that grains are going to be more of a risk for you because usually it's related to your gut lining and how tough that is, right? This is one of those genes that I consider when I'm thinking about how important it is for you to avoid grains. I think this one is important.
Okay, good thing.
So grains, they got the folic acid. They're probably disposing you to leaky gut
Everyone
more than most
eating
people.
Grains.
And then they're full of carbs, and you're not metabolizing the carbs as well. So for you got to avoid grains even more than most people.
So I don't metabolize carbs well, and I don't metabolize fats well.
Yeah, according to the FTO gene, yeah.
So I got to become a carnivore.
No, but so meat, and you've got a bunch of pro-meat genes that indicate meat's really beneficial. So that's true, yeah. Except I think you're okay with fat.
Do you think so?
It's just, like I said, I disagree a little bit with Rhonda Patrick on that one. It just predisposes you to diabetes in a standard American diet study. What does that mean? I don't know. It probably means sugar plus fat at the same time is really bad for you. Right. Because that's what most Americans are doing. They're eating sugar and fat. And that will probably whiten your fat. It'll make the fat less, they'll store more fat. They'll have less mitochondria. They'll burn less energy if you're eating sugar, if you're eating carbs and fat at the same time. Just for you specifically,
good to know.
That's probably what's happening. And then number 20 on your list there on your Excel, which isn't an Excel because I printed it. These are mental genes. And I know I talked about FOXO3 already and sugar metabolism, but the first one on there, number 20, is a plus for longer telomeres. So that usually indicates longer longevity. So if you did those telomere studies that you can do, which are kind of cool, yours would probably, your biological age is probably better than the average person. Great. Even if you weren't doing anything healthy and you're doing a bunch of everything healthy. So you're probably super young according to your telomeres, which are the end caps on your DNA.
Right. So I've had it done twice. And it's changed.
It comes back younger?
No, terrible.
Really?
First time I did it, I don't know if I was, that's honestly why, one of the reasons that, not reasons, but one of the things that was like, made me okay with retiring from bodybuilding. Yeah. I had already decided.
That's probably what I would have attributed it more
for sure.
to the bodybuilding.
So I had already decided to retire, but I did the telomere test.
When did you do it relative to compete, like posing? Like an actual
8 weeks after competing.
Weeks after, okay.
And then I did it again 18 months later.
And it was better?
Substantially better.
Yeah, exactly. So
I went from 51 to 39.
Yep. Yeah. Because when you're competing, you're starving yourself, and your telomeres are they're gonna chew themselves up. Yeah. And that takes a long time for them to recover back.
It's only 18 months, and I saw a big that's why I thought maybe the first one was a little bit skewed.
Oh, for sure.
The subjectivity of it, like who knows, but
no, it's interesting, and it's a kind of a good thermometer for how sensitive you might be. Like if you're eating a ton of gluten and stuff and you get your telomeres tested and they're super short and then you get off the grains and then they lengthen up, longevity, man. Right. But you've got genetically better telomeres. And then the next one is interesting, 21. That's your oxytocin receptor. It's a plus minus, but it usually means you're less, the scientists say you have less empathy because of that gene. But I don't think that's true because in my experience, people with this gene, they have incredible empathy, but it's just the terminology. Usually it means you're more stoic or you're more unflappable. Like basically the way I see it in people I consult with every day is I see you just don't care as much about the Twitter comments and the trolling and stuff like that. Right. You don't get super upset about it. And some people do and I think it's related to oxytocin. Yeah.
This is the Twitter gene.
The
troll gene.
So it's not really empathy. It's something different slightly, right. But scientists define it as empathy for to look at the studies. So, and you see it in like serial killers on the far extreme, which you're not the far extreme. And that's the kind of thing you would look for, right? In those prison inmates and things. Right. But I think that's an advantageous gene to have because if you don't get super riled up about some silly Twitter trolls, you can move on with your life and improve your business and all that. Because anybody who does who is self-employed and running their own business, you get a lot of flack these days from all the social platforms.
Yes, sir.
ApoE3, I'm sure you know you're an ApoE33, ApoE33.
Yep.
And that's an important gene because a huge amount of your brain is made up of cholesterol. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the reasons, like if you have diabetes and you're eating a ton of sugar, you see a huge increase in Alzheimer's risk because, sugar, not good for your brain. Cholesterol, awesome for your brain, right? Like having high cholesterol decreases Alzheimer's. And this gene, the reason this one's important for Alzheimer's is because, well, number one, scientists find that if you've got ApoE4/4, that's like a plus. Usually those are the early onset Alzheimer's people, like the age 50, and they get Alzheimer's, that sort of thing. It's genetic, it's this gene. It doesn't have to be that way. You can prevent it, but you want to know in advance. So you can there's a lot of strategies, including sugar, right? Like that's probably the biggest one, sugar, inflammation. Use infrared, set it right up against your skull. It gets through, it decreases Alzheimer's. There's good strategies. But with ApoE, right, it's a cholesterol transporter. So you have these so cholesterol floats on water. So if you were to eat cholesterol, your blood is like water, just like the estrogen. Mm-hmm. It would float. So you need a transport system. Apoproteins are a transport system. So you've got ApoA, you've got ApoB, you've got ApoC, of course ApoE, right? And so you're transporting cholesterol. ApoE specifically is highly expressed in your brain. That's kind of like your brain cholesterol transporter. And because cholesterol is so important in your brain, if you've got a dysfunctional ability to transport it around, ApoE4, then you're going to see Alzheimer's. If you've got ApoE2, you usually get more of a heart attack risk. Like the cholesterol gets deposited into your arteries. So you're 3-3, that's awesome.
That's the best one.
So there's ApoE2, there's 3, there's 4, there's different versions of Apo. So it's complicated, right? Because there's ApoA, ApoB, so there's ApoC, then there's 1, 2, 3, 4.
Association known yet?
Not for you, no, this is a beneficial one. But everybody should know their ApoE genes. If you get your DNA done, that's
Rhonda talks about that a lot.
Yeah, it's a high priority gene. So let's talk drugs. Number 23, you have the lowest odds of cannabis dependence, plus, and that's your cannabinoid receptor. So you just don't get jazzed up about it as much. And I'm not going to ask you whether you've taken it or not.
Yeah, man. Not very many times.
But you're just not as attracted to it genetically. And then the other thing is you don't have issues with paranoia, at least, either. And I don't have that listed here, but I do check what's called the AKT gene. And that's involved in paranoia with cannabis, and it's pretty well confirmed in multiple studies. So, people talk about cannabis and how, like Joe Rogan especially, of course, is a big proponent of cannabis. And CBD is awesome, right? And anti-inflammatory, all this. But he talks about how, like if you get paranoia, it's probably because of your state and your mental state, and you're probably not, mentally.
Sure, you're just an anxious person or in an anxious state.
And so it's a developmental thing, but there's a genetic component. Big time. So people that are getting paranoia from cannabis, almost every time they have that AKT gene. So I check for that. So you don't have that, but it's important for people to know. That it's not necessarily their fault, in other words. Yeah. If you're getting paranoia from cannabis, it's probably genetic, and it's not, like, I disagree with Rogan on this.
So how do you deal with it? Is it like, if someone has the paranoia, is it only specifically when they smoke marijuana, or is it?
Yeah, it's when they're buzzed from marijuana, like higher. Okay. Yeah.
So just don't smoke marijuana.
Well, you can go that route. Yeah. I mean, paranoia, and what I agree with Rogan on is it can be beneficial in terms of assessing the state that you're in and your life and kind of where you're at. Maybe you need a little paranoia to kind of get you up and moving, but
my brain always goes to what's the mechanism? Is like we talked about, like, is it just the gene transcription, or is there like it's mental influencing some pathway that maybe you could influence some way? Like, is it influencing some?
Well, the cannabinoid receptor is really easy, right? Because your brain expresses these cannabinoid receptors because you have endogenous cannabinoids. In other words, your body makes chemicals that bind that receptor. And just like opioids, right? You've got opioid receptors. Sure. And so you know, if you've got a dysfunction or if it doesn't bind opioids as well, or if your opioid receptor doesn't stick to them, or if your cannabinoid receptor doesn't stick to them, you don't get as much activation.
Right.
So you don't get, like I said, you don't get all hyped up about it. You don't feel it just, you don't feel as different. So, you know, you're pretty more apathetic about it or neutral. Like, oh, cannabis, whatever. But if you had major stimulation, right, you'd be like, yeah, cannabis, you know?
Yeah.
That's usually how it would manifest.
Interesting.
And same with the paranoia gene, right? It's in your brain. It's a neuronal change or stimulation change. Anyway, so number 24, there's only a few more, but 24 is nicotine dependent. So you have less nicotine dependence. You're plus, and that's your nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. So basically, you know, not super important to know, but I think because you have less nicotine dependence issues genetically, yeah, smoke some cigars. You know, you're probably not going to get addicted. If you had really high predilection to getting addicted, I'd say be really cautious. You know what I mean? Especially with you, because the smoke is more, you're more sensitive to smoke. So that's how I'm thinking about this. And then let me just look here. The number 25 is another nicotine gene. That's actually a CYP gene. And you have a non-functioning variant, meaning you're missing that gene, the CYP2A6, and that's involved in nicotine breakdown. So nicotine stays in your body longer as well. So nicotine is interesting for you because it stays in your body longer, but you're not quite as addicted to it. Your receptors aren't popping quite as much. And smoke is a big factor. So it is what it is. It's kind of a yin-yang, you know, some pluses, some minuses.
Right.
Yeah. Nicotine can be a performance-enhancing drug that's legal in a lot of ways. I appreciate it.
Yep. I've been known to chew a piece of nicotine gum from time to time.
The gum is great, exactly.
Yeah.
You just don't want to smoke. And it can be preventative against Alzheimer's in certain ways. Now, there's studies that suggest the opposite. There's kind of people on one side of the fence, and then people saying that it protects against Alzheimer's. I'm more on that side with the nicotine, just based on my own research. And I think it's because it activates your brain. It fires neurons, just like meditation is good at anti-stress. You know, like these people that are sitting and watching TV, they're probably getting more Alzheimer's because their brain isn't really firing. But let's say you're watching TV and chewing nicotine gum, your brain is artificially firing as if you're learning a new language or you're doing something. You're stimulating it chemically, which is still beneficial in my opinion against Alzheimer's. But the risks with the cigarettes are so far, you know, superseding the benefits that you don't want to smoke cigarettes.
So the takeaway is only smoke homegrown tobacco.
Yeah, with the cigar. You're more stimulated by coffee. And I think you're actually a fast metabolizer of caffeine, right? So I have that on your detox genes. So within 4 hours, you're burning it off, which is a minus gene. But this gene is interesting because it's a group of SNPs that indicate you're more stimulated. So you get stimulated, but you break down really fast. So it's similar. It's kind of an interesting clash in your genetics.
So I can drink lots of coffee and benefit.
And get super juiced up about it, yeah. You have, in terms of alcohol, I always look at various alcohol genes because a lot of people have predispositions to alcohol dependence, you know, like alcoholism, and some people don't. You don't. I don't think. I'm just going to double check. Yeah, you don't have any of that, but you do have, and you have a beneficial gene that a plus number 27 for decreased risk in coronary heart disease from a glass of wine per day. So you've seen these headlines that say like drinking wine every day is better than going to the gym.
You know, I would be, except damn glyphosate. I'm like, I can't do it, man.
Yeah.
Especially North American wine. I'm like, if I can get something, you know, from overseas, I'll drink it. But
yeah. Well, the other thing too is, for you and your genetics, a glass of wine per day would be beneficial. And that's your cholesterol esterase transporter gene, that's CETP gene. But your cholesterol, you've got that dialed in with your diet. You know, you don't have inflammatory issues where you're ripping up you're not inflamed. You don't have your arteries inflamed, and then cholesterol is coming in and patching those up and causing plaques. Because you don't have that issue, I don't think wine would really be that beneficial because you're already healthy. But if you were eating standard American, wine would probably be beneficial for you based on
it. So next time you eat McDonald's, I'll start with 2 glasses of wine.
Just wine.
Bottle of wine at McDonald's. Get a box of wine.
Right in.
Exactly.
Just sit out the front door. Sit outside. The next gene is GS191. So that's it's a group of genes involved in ibuprofen metabolism. So basically you have poor ibuprofen metabolism. So I would avoid the heck out of that for you.
Never take it.
That's your CYP2, C8, and C9 genes, these liver enzymes. It's just they're not breaking it down. And there's a lot of new adverse effects they're discovering with it, I'm sure you know.
Man, you couldn't pay me to take this stuff.
Good, yeah. So that's it for that. Number 29 was interesting. I listed it because it's a group of genes. They're checking for your CYP3A5, another liver enzyme, but you don't have it. You're a non-expressor, meaning it's just not there. It's not super rare. But what's interesting is that one's involved in breaking down testosterone. So the fact that you don't have it might indicate you would just naturally have higher levels because you're not breaking it down. It just stays there longer, which is a good thing. It's
good news.
Yeah, I don't have any issue. It's just something, but I don't think there's any specific studies that can prove that. But I mean, if it's breaking down it, testosterone, and you don't even have the gene, yeah, it should increase it. And number 30, you have a plus minus increased susceptibility to novelty seeking. That's your dopamine receptor. I just find that one kind of fun.
Yeah, the fact that they call it
health related.
Right.
And then in terms of disease risk, here's the risks you have in case you don't want to mention any of them, but I mean, they're all pretty innocuous. Yeah, I mean, hemochromatosis is the first one. A lot of people have that.
What's that?
Your plus minus for it, that's high iron.
Oh.
So you tend to build up iron more. Now again, it's plus minus, and that's 31 there. And most people that have that as a plus minus, I find that it's not above the recommended range. It'll be right up on the top on your lab tests.
So just give blood.
Yeah. And you definitely don't want to supplement iron, or that kind of thing. And, it can oxidize, having high iron can be oxidative. It can cause reactions in your arteries you don't want, that sort of thing. So it's important. The 32 is a plus, like almost 20-fold increase for type 1, increased risk for type 1 diabetes, which obviously you don't have. But it's a risk. So that's an immune system related gene. So, you didn't have too many immune related genes, but I always like to kind of check and try and piece together a story. If you've got a lot of hyperactive immune system, it's important to be super careful with these inflammatory foods and all this. That's probably the only one besides the 35 on there, which is a 2-fold increased risk for Hashimoto's. Hashimoto's is when your immune system starts eating your thyroid gland. Yeah. So those are kind of your immune genes. In fact, number 34, I know I kind of flipped the order a little bit, but that one's a 10-fold increased risk for autoimmune thyroid disease.
Wow.
So you had a couple risks in terms of your thyroid and your immune system. And, so anything that interacts between like soy, for example, like soy definitely interacts with your thyroid gland. That's why you find a lot of kids with goiter and stuff that are on these infant formulas with soy, and obviously avoid the heck out of that. And I know you do, but iodine would be more important than normal for you. You're eating seafood, you're probably fine, but just keep that fine-tuned. You probably want to decrease your fluoride consumption, which you probably already do. So a lot of stuff. There's specific strategies you could do to try and optimize your thyroid function and make sure your immune system isn't in there chewing it up. But you're probably already doing all those things.
Just pay attention to healthy gut stuff.
Yeah, and just kind of keep an eye on your thyroid, levels when you're doing blood tests.
Very interesting. My thyroid level is honestly not great.
Yeah, that's probably
sometimes my immune
stuff.
system is elevated. My doctor's like, "Why is your white blood cell count high?" I was like, "I don't know." That could be your answer.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good books on that. I mean, the best I can do sometimes is just point you to experts, and I know you're more versed in that stuff than I am. So thankfully,
white blood cell expert.
Well, and then these Hashimoto's people and.
Tatis Karazian is the guy, man. You know who he is?
No.
He's the guy. He's the guy in the world for autoimmunity, but he's impossible to get in touch with.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's the guy.
He's a scientist.
Yeah, he's
a scientist, man. They're notorious. We're notorious for just not.
But he's
not
a scientist who's
about,
become a celebrity because he's a scientist. Because everyone obviously has some
immune-related issues.
Autoimmunity.
Yeah.
He's the guy.
Wow.
See if we can track him down.
Well, let me give you one last gene because we only have one last gene. Yeah. That's number 33. It's plus minus, so you're a carrier of biotinidase deficiency mutation. That's your BTD gene. That's a really tongue twister gene. Basically, it's where biotin isn't released from proteins during digestion, and it usually leads to less biotin in your system. And then, by the way, biotin is B7, but I recommend supplementing biotin or making sure you get plenty of biotin, because that's usually, if you had the plus for that, you'd be super low in biotin.
Okay. And
you should try it and see, like just straight up try supplementing a bunch of biotin and see if you feel a difference. I'd predict that you would, and most people wouldn't. You know what I mean? And if you don't feel a difference, don't worry about it. You're probably eating plenty of it with your eggs and stuff, and you cook your eggs. Yeah. Some people, if you're eating a lot of raw eggs, it might be binding up the biotin with the avidin. Eggs have a lot of avidin, which sticks to biotin, and then you just pass that out, and you're basically, just passing it out into the toilet instead of utilizing it.
Awesome. So,
but that's
for any of the listeners who want to go out and do the 23andMe, what are the best recommendations that you can make for learning how to read these things? Because then everyone's going to have access to you. Or if you want to give out some type of contact info, you can do that. But, like I said, I've used Prometheus. Are any of them actually useful?
I think Prometheus is probably my favorite because it links up to Snippedia. Yeah. And that gives you a lot of good, resources. I definitely do this for people. At a consulting level, I charge $300 for a 60-minute session, which I consider pretty reasonable.
Super cheap.
Because I have to do work in advance to line this up and take notes for everybody. And to some degree, that's the ultimate because, not everybody has the time to kind of learn how all these things work in concert and the big picture with the physiology and the different tissues. I mean, so some of it,
so informative.
Yeah. So for like professional scientists, Prometheus, there's a lot of them. There's a ton of them out there actually, and they're all good, I think. They all have unique aspects that they're looking at. But yeah, I mean, you can send me an email. I'm pretty, I'm happy to do it. I love talking to people. Like I said, I used to do just pro athletes because that 1% difference is a huge difference for these guys. Yep. But
I'm sure the people who contact you
benefit.
would be serious about it anyways. Like the people who aren't serious, I
don't get that many junk emails, thankfully.
Yeah, so you can give that out, or we can just link to it. Up to you, man.
No, both. Well, AJ Consulting Company. If you just Google that, that's where people find my email addresses and things.
Amazing, man. That was
good,
massive for me. I'm so grateful. So.
I hope I didn't bore your listeners too much.
No, man, I think that was awesome.
Try to make it relevant for everybody else.
We'll give them a disclaimer right as the podcast begins. Like, hey, we're about to go into the stuff talking about Ben's DNA. But Dr. J,
hey, man.
Man, you're awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Hopefully we can do 10 more of these. Thank you, man.
Join us on benpakulski.com to learn the cutting-edge techniques to take control of your body, your brain, and create your greatest life.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Ben Pakulski and the producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.